Aboriginal Tribes of India and Pakistan by Hobe Mustafa Shah, first published in 1900. This book can be found on the site here, globalgraybooks.com/Aboriginal Tribes of India and Pakistan ebook.html. Global Gray 2025 globalgraybooks.com. Contents: Preface, Introduction, Ancestry, History, Occupation, General Characteristics. The Family Festivals, Religion, Folk Thoughts, Social Life, Cosmology, Customs and Manners. Cultural Identity, Folklore and Folk Songs. Preface: I could never realize how difficult it is to write encomium about a wife one loved so intensely and who reciprocated in such a large measure her love and devotion. Hawa had all the great attributes of head and heart that a woman can be proud of and for a husband to admire. We had a great deal of exchange of views and debated, but still thought so much alike. Her intellectual capacity, administrative efficiency and literary excellence, I always admired. She helped me in selecting articles and quotations for Sint Quarterly exactly I would want. Our minds always met whether we differed seriously or not. Our logomachy always ended in smiling and laughter. Her asthma, which she contacted when she was in England, began to bother her for a long time, when suddenly it became cardiac, and within 12 hours of this attack she died and left me for good. She was not only a great teacher but also a consummate educational administrator. She was a marvelous combination of strength and kindness. She had taught for nearly 35 years of her life, and gave the best of her efforts and endeavors to the profession of teaching. The great endearment she earned in her college life among both her colleagues and her students is a tribute to her. She is remembered with affection even today. This is a work which was sent to me after her death, by her dear friend and classmate, Miss Vanita Venchu from Allahabad. This is a thesis presented to the university for her master's degree in anthropology after studying and observing the details of the life, habits and traditions of the Khalis and the Bhils among whom she lived, a brave thing to do for a Muslim girl in 1942, 1943. One can only admire her simplicity and accuracy of writing. This is a real original work of research and scholarship published nearly 9 years after her death. May her soul rest in peace. After a married life of 22 years she has left a tremendous void in my life, and with indelible memories of happiness. Literally it was my good fortune to have married her. Sayyid Ghulam Mustafa Shah. Introduction. The untimely death of Professor Mrs. H.B. Mustafa Shah has robbed us of the benefits of a lady anthropologist, already so very few in number, who, not content with the knowledge of anthropology gained from college textbooks, had herself embarked on field research in the subject and has left behind a book on the Bhils and the Khalis, Aboriginal Tribes of India, which would be a credit to any anthropologist of repute. Not many, even amongst the better educated amongst us, seem to care to know the importance of anthropology. Somehow it is thought to be somewhat of a remote subject, dealing mostly with primitives and aboriginals far removed from our modern civilization and culture. That is not at all so. This is the age of science. This is the age of observation, of experiment and of reason. There is just no known limit to these three processes, now tremendously at work all the progressive world over, with breakneck speed, and in all branches of human interest and knowledge. Anthropology is one such branch. The Oxford Dictionary defines anthropology as whole science of man, human physiology and psychology, study of man as an animal true, but not a mere biped, the animal who builds whole artificial worlds from the natural resources he finds around and, now, creates things not found in nature also. He is the most fascinating of all animals. The anthropologist falls a prey to this unending fascination, so he begins his unending study of man as an animal with the study of the humans who can be said to be living more near natural surroundings than those who live in far more complex artificial surroundings like towns and cities. He tries to study man's origins, his mental work with his physical equipment, the origins of customs and manners and all other social continuities. So, in search of these origins, he studies the primitives. Primitives means prime people, not secondaries that the rest of us happen to be. So, the term primitives is not to be used as a condescending term, but as the acknowledgement that without the primitives we would not have been there at all. Our debt of gratitude to them can never be repayable. They are our ancestors in the most demonstrable sense of the term. It is they who have laid the foundations and, in many instances, the very superstructure of civilizations and culture, of language and thought and other primary inventions. Those whom we may, in our haughtiness and forgetfulness, derisively call primitives are the people who have been historically outstripped, mostly through force and fraud by such of us, from amongst them, who through historical accidents, coincidences, and clean breakthrough of creativity and social and militant insight, subdued the rest and have reduced them to political, social, cultural and economic helplessness and dispossession of their habitats, and have left them utterly at our own pitiless mercy and heartless exploitation, not only of their bodies but, worse, also of their very minds and spirit. The present-day bills and colhis, to be found in many parts of this subcontinent, are amongst such a cowed-down, browbeaten and dispossessed people. Perhaps no humanist in the world can study the fate of the Red Indians, the Negroes, the Eskimos, the Australians, the Maoris and bills and colhis without helpless compassion on seeing how man eats man in the name of civilization and culture. Mrs. H.B. Mustafa Shah is obviously one such humanist who embarked upon the study and field research and anthropology of the bills and colhis, with a human heart, and what a work of art itself is her study of these people. Not at all content with the usual prescribed format of students' field work for thesis requirements in the universities, she has, as can be seen from the study of this book, gone deeper into the humanistic values of the purest res serene she found in her study of the culture of the bills and the colhis. Ponder on one of her statements: in the eyes of the bill the speaking of untruth is one of the most despicable of crimes. Whatever happens, the bill will always give a most correct description even when it is detrimental to himself. Even in case of homicide he has puzzled the courts of law and justice. The uneducated bill always confesses without restraint, and his strong urge to speak the truth is by no means diminished by the knowledge that punishment may be hard. When she points out that the uneducated bill speaks the truth irrespective of consequences, she shows us how great he is. She echoes the statement of Robert Bums that an honest man, though ever so poor, is king of man for all that. And then see for yourself what happens to the civilized bill. The slightly polished bill, she says, behaves differently. He uses his insufficient knowledge in such a way that any commitment of his appears distorted in his favor. He hides and conceals the truth with the express aim of sparing himself from punishment. Then she points out that because of this corruption of the very soul of man that civilization causes, the aboriginal concerned with the chastity of his soul condemns any sort of education, firmly believing that the ability to read and write undermines traditions and customs, and it is not astonishing that he eyes with disfavor the influence exercised by town. How many of us can say that? And the uneducated bill is always fond of his wife, she says. To desert a wife is, according to bill tradition, an unpardonable act. Call them uncivilized? Then Mrs. H.B. Mustafa Shah shows how, not content with having dispossessed the aboriginals of their lands, the civilized man from towns and cities is relentlessly bent upon further exploiting them since ages on end. The boggart or the priest from the towns and cities extracts religious tributes, and the money lender enslaves these people without any pity or mercy. Despite the fact that the bills are so jealous of their personal freedom, they never attempted to counteract the boggats' endeavor to render the bill slaves of his influence. The boggart is the intermediary between the gods and the bills, and superstitious to the highest degree. No bill dares to contradict, and yet, nobody has already been more attacked than the boggart. His prestige, however, remains unshaken thanks to his own cleverness. The book is, thus, replete, not only with pure academic objectives and above all, verifiable findings and observations, but also with that humanistic insight that makes it eminently readable for the general public also. It is a spectrum of the life and living of the bills and the colhis, and what a social spectroscopic study of the bills and colhis life she has made, even as a student then. The 9 chapters of her study contain within themselves most easily and most interestingly stated, and above all, most humanistically written aspects of the bills and colhis life, beginning with ancestry, history, occupation and general characteristics. B. Death and burial customs. C. Folk thoughts. D. Cosmology. E. Religion. F. Social life. G. Customs and manners. H. Cultural identity. I. Folklore and folk songs. Throughout this book one sees that the life of the bills and the colhis is not at all isolated, in spite of the struggle for cultural identity. The more complex cultures around are relentlessly exerting their pressures. Mrs. Shah is not at all blind to such of the features in the life of the bills that have remained unhelpful to them. She is critical and awake. One of such, as she points out, is their excessive fondness for alcohol. Also, after all is said and done, at least in some respects she finds them to be less mature than, say, the Gonds and some other tribes in the subcontinent, going beyond the bounds of duty, as only a strict matter-of-fact anthropologist, and wielding the cudgel of humanism and ethics. Mrs. Shah has come to the defense of the politically, socially, culturally, economically bulldozed bills and colhis and also other tribes in no uncertain terms. Who else, at least from amongst us, but she can in their defense so forcefully pled with elegance and empathy, in these unforgettable words. Aborigines and their primitive culture acquired, thanks to distorted reports of explorers, who usually culminate their investigations by releasing a flood of minimizing and prejudicial literature on the subject, acquired the reputation of forming the elements of the lowest possible strata of human advance, and this state of affairs became an ill-used criterion applied by mankind, who, only too eager to cover its own shortcomings, loves to draw attention to those inhabitants of the earth less advanced, or should one say less shrewd, than itself. Contempt and the cherished manner of looking down on less fortunate fellow creatures resulted consequently in harmful misunderstanding which could so far not be drowned by the voice of a very limited number of interested and understanding investigators. Even the school books are packed with wrong and entirely misleading descriptions of the life, modes of living and cultural manifestations of Aborigines, and it is hardly astonishing that this type of knowledge, once established in the receptive mind of a young brain, tends to remain fixed. The mere mention of the word Jungluala provokes a shudder, projecting fantastic scenes of naked tribesmen hunting in hostile virgin forests, notions of squalor and filth, primitive life in caves and bloodthirsty feasts on unspeakable repulsive kinds of food. The press, magazines and films further corrupt the minds of children and adults by presenting the Aborigines in a manner irresponsible and positively prejudicial, exploiting by this means man's utterly regrettable inclinations to see and to hear something about hair-raising habits of some isolated and neglected tribe. The impression is created that one should be very glad to belong to a more cultured circle, apart from a deliberately fostered tendency to keep aloof from those wretched creatures, the sight of which is already enough to drive anybody to fits. Did not every one of us read thrilling stories of Aborigines who roast their slain opponents? Certainly cannibalism did exist, though it has long been proved that cannibalism was based on a carnal lust and cruelty. But nobody felt prevented to believe that this kind of barbaric lack of consideration that contributed so much to the rather doubtful reputation of Aborigines is nothing else than a ritualistic manifestation of a certain type of culture excellent in the eyes of the adherents, but not too pleasing in the eyes of the civilized world. Besides, the city dweller whose whole outlook on life is exclusively centered on appearances, make-ups, aping of superiors, fashions and super smart chit-chat on world reforms, brotherhood and mutual understanding etc., feels instinctively repulsed when he is compelled to contact a stray member of an aboriginal tribe. The Jungluala is usually the exponent of poverty and shabbiness. His simple manners do not make him eligible to membership of dandy clubs. In addition, the tribesman unwillingly contributes to the maintenance of wrong ideas as to himself. This shy and helpless behavior, his embarrassment apparently stress that he merely belongs to the scum of mankind. This impression is indeed quite wrong. Some Junglualas may be rascals. The majority, however, incorporated into the simple but pure culture of their tribes, though less civilized as they may be, positively represents a most valuable type of man, a culture sparkling with life, simplicity, honesty and void of hypocrisy. These assets alone are worthy of any effort. Present day's life has become so cramped an affair, complicated in all its details, dominated by greed, falsehood and hypocrisy, boredom and lack of sincerity, that it is imperative to question the usefulness of so wretched a force which our lives have happened to become through our own fault. Should we not listen to the song of Aborigines peacefully relaxing in the shade of a mahar tree? A song so free from worldly haste, so rich in sound, saturated with a melodious narrative of love, frank longing, fulfillment and happiness. This is the language we should learn to understand, and once understood, we will cease to be slaves of our own life and our self-created institutions, let alone the many other virtues of this book. If Mrs. Shaw, as a student and teacher of anthropology over here, had done nothing else than to have expressed her defense of the essential greatness and essential humanness of the maligned, scorned, exploited and culturally and spiritually browbeaten Aborigines who had done others no known wrong, even then, she deserves a nation a temple of humanism. But she has done much more. She has tried to touch the strings of justice and mercy in the lyre of our heart with the fingers of scientific investigation of the problem of human beings, the Bills and Collis. She is no more with us, but she remains our Margaret Mead. Dr. G. M. McCree, Ancestry, History, Occupation, General Characteristics. The Bills belong to the so-called Aboriginals of India. This is practically all that is known about their ancestry. There was a time when they were regarded as Dravidians, closely related to the Gonds, but this opinion has been discarded. The physiognomy and the nature of the Bills and those of the Dravidians differ too much to allow us to place them in the same racial fold. The Bills are more primitive, more original, simply children of nature. In this respect they differ considerably even from the least developed of the Dravidians, namely the Gonds, which are their neighbors. It is noteworthy that the Bills also, from a linguistic point of view, differ widely from the Dravidians, their language being of Aryan origin. Another theory has been advanced, namely that the Bills are a Munda people, that is to say, they are closely related to the so-called Kuls and Santals in Bengal, Bihar and Assam. This theory is more probable, though one who has had an opportunity to see and associate with these people cannot fail to observe a certain similarity between them and the Bills. Here is the same primitive nature, and partly at least, the same physiognomy, but this does not settle the question. However, we are not yet in a position to make a positive and definite statement in this respect. The language may or may not be a guiding star. If, however, due regard is paid to the language, it will lead us in another direction. The Munda and the Bill dialects have very little or no organic relations, nor does history provide us with a solution of the problem. The question of the origin of the Bills is thus still left unsettled. All that we can say is that they seem to belong to the Aboriginals, which do not seem to be so very closely related to the Dravidians. They are probably still older, pre-Dravidians. Many attempts have been made to discover from the name of the tribe, their original status and cultural conditions, if not their racial origin at the time of the Aryan invasion of their country. Different theories have been advanced. Bill is thus said to have been derived from the Dravidian word bila, a bow. In that case the name would mean a bowman. This derivation is, however, not very likely. It is true that the Bills are skillful archers, and were more so in days gone by, but other Indian aborigines have not been inferior to them when it comes to this skill. Thus there is no reason why they should just be called bowmen above all others. Others have derived the word Bill from the Sanskrit word bila, meaning hole, cave, etc. Should this derivation be right, the Bill would originally have been a cave dweller. I think this conjecture, too, is wrong. A third theory is more plausible. According to this, the word Bill is derived from the Sanskrit word abhira, a cowherd. The apocryph, Bila, the word has arrived at its present form, Bill. One does not require much linguistic experience to realize the possibility of a word undergoing changes in this way. In Hindi and other North Indian languages, a cowherd is still called ahir. In Kutch there lives a comparatively large group of ahirs, whose mother tongue is so closely related to the Bili dialects that as Grierson's linguistic survey they have been treated as one of them. And further, in Khandesh there is a Bili dialect called Arani, which is the same as Ahirani, i.e. the language of the ahirs or cowherds. At the stage of our present knowledge, there are reasons to interpret the word Bill as a cowherd. Thus the Bills may be supposed to have been cowherds originally, i.e. at the time of the Aryan invasion. If this interpretation is right, the Bills must have reached a fairly high standard of civilization at that time. In the annals of history the Bills figure very rarely. It is, however, believed that they can be traced as far back as 2,000 years ago, if not further. The great Alexandrian geographer, Claudius Ptolemaeus, who flourished in the beginning and middle of the 2nd century, mentions an Indian people called Philides. There is reason to believe that this refers to the Bills, who then, more than now, had their abode on the west coast. In Mahabharata, the longest epic the world has ever seen and written about 200 BC, the Bills are referred to under the name of Kulinda as participants in the Great War described in the epic, Valmiki's Ramayana, which is believed to have been composed about 500 BC. Is also acquainted with the Bills. They fought in Rama's army against Ravan, the despotic demon from Lanka. Ceylon, and Rama, the 7th avatar of Vishnu, is said to have eaten berries from the hand of a Bill woman, Sabari. If, as is generally supposed, Rama should have lived and reigned about 1600 BC, the Bills must have been a people known in India since the time of Moses' appearance in Egypt. Besides these two epics, other holy books of the Hindus, e.g. Panchtantra, mention the Bills. When we draw closer to modern times, we find the Bills mentioned more frequently on the pages of history. During the long wars waged by the Mohammedan kings and their rule over India, the Bills play a rather important role. About 1000 AD they were in possession of large tracts of Gujarat and central India. By and by they were, however, expelled from their ancestral land both by the Muslims and the Rajputs, and their land was occupied. But this did not take place without bloody fighting, and the Bills were never completely subdued. In the unapproachable backwoods they continued to live an independent life. By the Mao rulers they are praised as a diligent and law-abiding people. and previous to that time, in the 11th century, their villages are held up as models, where industriousness and cleanliness are prevailing, law being administered, and discipline strictly applied. In mythology, the Bill woman is glorified as being plucky, pretty and chaste. Thus, for instance, when Parvati wanted to charm Mahadev in order to make him forego his ascetic life, she adopted the shape of a Bill woman. Most wonderful of all that tradition has to tell is that Valmiki, the great author of Ramayana, was a Bill. This goes to prove that the Bills, thousands of years ago, occupied a prominent place among the various peoples of India, and that their culture at that time had reached a high standard. From the Marathas, which entered the scene in the beginning of the 17th century and for a couple of centuries fought with the Mughals and the British for the supremacy of areas inhabited by the Bills, the latter ones did not get any praise. No mercy was shown to them. No people seems to have been treated more severely by them, even taken into account that the descriptions given by the English historians of the atrocities of the Marathas are considerably colored. Enough remains to prove that their treatment of the Bills was unusually severe and cruel. If, for example, a man was captured in a riotous area and it was proved that he was Bill, this was regarded as reason enough to fleece and hang him without trial, or else his nose and ears were cut off and he was burnt to death in a red, hot iron chair or on a heated cannon. Every year hundreds of Bills were hurled down the high precipice of Antar to perish in the deep abyss. On one occasion 3 large groups of Bills with a letter of safe conduct had assembled in 3 towns in Kandisi in order to receive pardon, as had been solemnly promised, for an uproarious attempt. They were however killed, beheaded, or shot, their women were mutilated or smoked to death, while their children were dashed against stones or rocks. If the Bills had already started to degenerate socially, culturally, politically and intellectually, the pace was now accelerated. It was during these hard days that they underwent the last stage of their development, which brought them to the point of degeneration, which they have occupied all since. When in 1818 the British took over the Bill country, the Bills, by the sad play of fate, had developed into the most canny, skillful but suspicious and unmanageable guerrilla fighters, highwaymen, and freebooters. It took a long time, much patience and wisdom to pacify the country and win the confidence of the Bills, but at last this end was achieved, and during the last half of a century the Bills have lived a very peaceful and quiet life. Only a few years ago they were however counted among the criminal tribes, who were registered with the police and had to report at fixed intervals. This system is still in vogue in several districts, although it is rare in West Khandesh. Today the Bill is as a rule a harmless being. If not provoked or unfairly treated, he will harm nobody. But much is not required to conjure up the old nature, innate during many generations. Then he may change into the most formidable revenger or the most cunning and merciless culprit. Several instances of that kind are encountered now and then. The leader of a gang of robbers operating in and around Bilwada is more often than not a Bill. And in Akrani, where there is a compact population of Bills, and where the Swedish Alliance Mission has a station, Mandalore, murders are so common that Mr. Rowland, a Welshman, who served in our mission for some years, had reason to describe that area as the most criminal within the British Empire. Approximately 1 in 1,000 is murdered there every year. The average standard of the Bills, socially as well as economically, is very low. The majority lives from hand to mouth. In the areas where they form a small minority of the population, they have been degraded into the servants or coolies of other people, living from day to day on what little they can earn, gathering firewood in the jungle which they carry on their heads to villages and towns where it is sold, and so on. In places where they form a majority and a friendly government rules, they are farmers. In most cases they cultivate their land in a poor way, but there are also honorable exceptions. Personally, I know Bill farmers who are large landowners having hundreds of acres of land, which is being cultivated just as nationally as anybody else's in India. Besides farming, the Bill occupies himself with cutting, rough hewing and transport of timber. With other occupation or crafts he is rarely acquainted. In every Bill section of farmers, though, there are 1 or 2 carpenters who produce what simple farming implements are required. The smith work is generally done by artisans belonging to other tribes or castes. Hunting and fishing, especially the last mentioned, are occupations that are cherished by the Bills. As a result hereof the rivers in the Bill country are almost devoid of fish. Whole villages go a-fishing to a man, not to say to a woman. Dams are built to shut in the fish, then it is caught in hoop nets, bucks, pots, and nets, or with the hands. Not even the smallest can get away. It is an extremely picturesque and interesting thing to see the whole male and female population of a village wade through a river catching fish. Hunting will soon belong to the pleasures and occupations of the past. Game is continually on a decrease, and the bill is not allowed to carry the arms he wants, not even a large bow with iron arrows, let alone swords or spears or daggers or lances, and guns or rifles. But it may happen that even a panther is laid down before the insistent attacks by a group of bills, armed with bamboos only. But it may also happen that one or more bills have to pay with their lives for a reckless chase on wild boar, rabbits, antelopes, gazelles, and even deer, and blue bulls may be killed with bamboo lathis after having been tired out by a wild chase. During his hunting excursions the bill is possessed with a fury. Of one occupation the bill is a born master, viz., the distilling of liquor. Here nobody can compete with him, and the women are just as skilled as the men, as the government authorities both in British India as well as in the native states have monopoly of producing liquor. The whole traffic has to be carried on secretly, and in this art too the bill is a master. Few persons, whatever people they belong to, have such a pronounced ingenious skill of completely concealing what they want to conceal as the bill in general enjoys. Speaking of occupations and crafts, it should be mentioned that the bill builds his own house. Most bill dwellings are grass or straw huts. In jungles tracts, where bamboo is plentiful, the walls are made of split bamboos. The roof is thatched with straw, leaves, curry stalks or something of the kind. The walls are often made of bulrushes, maize stalks, etc. Nowadays bill dwellings are often found roofed with tiles, which, however, are not made by themselves. Of late quite a number of the farmer bills on the plain have erected for themselves big brick houses with roofs of corrugated iron. The bill is of a playful disposition, being jocular and of a comparatively lively imagination. He is in no way ungifted. On the contrary, the bills are probably more gifted than most of the aborigines of India. Their gift for languages is marked. It is not uncommon thing to come across bills who speak 3 or 4 languages fluently. In the primary schools they do just as well, if not better, than the children of other people. When it comes to higher studies they do not do so well. Generally speaking they are children. They are therefore not to be depended upon. It is easy to extract promises from them, but if you expect these to be fulfilled you will often be deceived. Like children they forget what they have promised. Their manners are pleasant, courteous and obliging. Among the inhabitants of Khandesh they are, in the opinion of many, the most gentlemanlike, and so one easily learns to like them. To get into real touch with them is not easy, though. Their degradation and ignorance are great. Only 4 men in 1,000 are literate. Among the women hardly 1 in 10,000. Drunkenness knows no restraint. Men, women and children learn from childhood to use intoxicating liquor. By Hindus, Mohammedans, and other confessors of indigenous religions, they are looked upon with contempt, oppressed and trampled down, but they are not regarded as untouchables. Even a Brahmin may take water from the hands of a bill. Some of them claim to be Kshatriyas, i.e. the second of the Indian castes, the warrior caste. Going into debt is so common that it is practically impossible to come across a bill without debts. It almost seems as if contracting debts is looked upon as a necessity of life. When a Christian bill once approached me in order to borrow money from me, his strongest argument was that he had no debt before. The money lenders therefore have a happy hunting ground among the bills. The lowest interest charged is 75%. Cases where the interest has amounted to 75% per month are not lacking. The most common rate seems to be 25% a month. More need not be said to explain the severity of the situation, but the worst part of the tale is not yet told, for according to Indian custom, debts are passed on from one generation to another, endlessly. The debt may thus become of 100 years standing and simply unpayable. The bill becomes the slave of the usurer, practically if not nominally. During the period of degradation the bill has degenerated even physically. He is dwarfed in some way. Oppression has stamped his features. Under the surface, however, a glimpse may be seen of a noble strain, something that tells you of a noble inheritance, of a happier past, and in this something lies the hope of development into something better and higher. Under the influence of the gospel of Jesus Christ, tribal divisions, dispersions, and numbers, the bills are not a homogeneous people. Far from that, few people are so divided into clans, tribes and families as are the bills. The full number of these have never been known. Some 50 are, however, known, and these are scattered over a tremendous area. We find them from the 18th to the 28th latitude and from the 72nd to the 77th longitude, approximately the area of the size of Sweden. A glance at the map will show that the bills, politically are divided between the native states of central India and Rajputana, Baroda, and other native states of Gujarat, British Gujarat, Khandesh, Nasik, Ahmednagar, Pune and other districts of Maharashtra, and Hyderabad Deccan, Kutch and Thar Desert and border areas of Sindh and Bawalpur. In West Khandesh we find the densest and broadest bill block. Experience has also shown that the bills that are most gifted and capable of development are to be found here. For all practical purposes these are the Devali speaking. They must however share this honor to some extent with those who have Mauchi as their language, a dialect closely related to Devali. The most prominent tribes or families within these areas are Padvi, Vasava, Valvi, Pardanaik, and Gavti. Originally these names have stood for professions: Padvi, rulers, officials and officers; Vasava, bailiffs and higher village officials; Valvi, councillors; and Gavti, cultivators. The only bill princess still in existence belonged to the Devali group. The only bills, so outstanding as to have become government officials, also belonged to the same category. Quite recently 3 of their number were appointed as honorary magistrates at their respective places. Other bill tribes in Khandesh are Nadri, Nidhali, Pavri, Nekali, Kajli, Kutli, Bardi, Adrani, Cockney, Kotri, Dubli, and others. These tribes often differ considerably as to intellectual gifts, disposition and character, social status, manners and customs and languages. The Pavri people do not even regard themselves as bills, boasting that they are Rajputs. It is possible that they have royal blood in their veins. Their posture and skin bespeak this. The Cockney people have been Hinduized and Marathized to such an extent as to regard themselves too distinguished to be ranked among the bills. The Kattars may not be pure bills. Their standard is lower than that of the Khandesh bills in general, and they form an inconsiderable minority in Khandesh. The Cutlass are on the whole are of a weaker character than the rest. They are also less industrious and therefore the poorest among the bigger tribes. They are of low morals. 100 of their women are to be found as second or third wives or concubines with Mohammedans. From their ranks the army of prostitutes is being fed. Prostitution is otherwise an unknown institution among the bills. The Cutlass live around Nandurbar. The hill tribes i.e. Pavri, Nidhali, Nadri, and some of the Valvi have the peculiarities of the hill people in a very marked way. The Devali people live in the western part of Nandurbar Taluka, round Danora, and Taloda Taluka and in the Mu estates, which are ruled by Bill Princess. In Shahada we have the Bardi and Kajli people, which belong to the best type of bills. In Sandkita they're Bardis and Aranis. In Sherpur and Dulia we find Aranis. The latter ones have been highly enslaved by the people they live among, and more so by liquor. The total number of bills in West Khandesh, including the Mu estates, was according to the census of 1,921, 233, 944. Since then they have without doubt increased. They number 38% of the total population of the district. Their dispersion is very uneven. The percentage for the different talukas is as follows: Dulia City 3%, Dulia Taluka 12%, Sandkita 12%, Sherpur 12%, Shahada 37%, Nandurbar 44%, Taloda 76%, Sakri 36%, and Navapur 86%. According to the census 1921 the total population of the bills in India is 1,795,508. This figure is probably too low. In the Linguistic Survey report published in 1907, the Bili-speaking people were estimated at 2,689,109. It may be safe to assume that the bills number at least 2 million. That the returns differ is accounted for by the fact that some strongly Hinduized tribes deny their bill origin. In any case 1/6 of the bills live in Khandesh. Compared to other aborigines, it will be found that the bills occupy the third place as far as numbers are concerned. For the Goms number 2,902,592 and the Santals 2,265,282. In importance however they do not lag behind these larger groups of aborigines. The family festivals. A bill who is himself a married man and a father relates as follows concerning an occasion of this kind: when symptoms appear that the days of the prospective mother are up, the women of the neighborhood are called in together with the midwife. The latter delivers her. When the child has been born, a hole is dug in one corner of the house for its bath. Close to this hole another one is dug where the placenta is thrown, whereafter the hole is filled with earth, which is packed. On the top of this cow dung is plastered. The child, which until now has undergone only a meager dry cleaning with a rag or a piece of cloth, is now laid by the midwife on a piece of board which is placed over the first hole, where it is thoroughly washed together with its mother, who also has been placed on the board. Duties thus performed, the midwife gets a few champas of grain from the house and leaves the house. The mother then has to do the bathing both of herself and the child. This is done twice a day over the above-mentioned hole. Her food consists of water gruel, which is served every 3 hours by a woman temporarily employed. After a lapse of 5 days, the father of the child goes to the liquor shop from where he brings a few, generally 6 bottles of liquor. Arrived home, he sends for the midwife again and the elder woman of the neighborhood, who will be there very quickly. The first duty of the midwife will now be to perform pankropunji, the worship of the 5th day, to the honor of which deity this is done, remains her secret as a rule. The worship having been performed, she fills up with earth the hole over which the child and her mother have been bathed. After having been packed, it is plastered with cow dung, on which she draws a design of red lead paint. Finally, she sprinkles a little liquor on the top of the whole thing. Of the liquor, the midwife takes a bottle with her home. What is left is divided between the women that have come and squatted down on the floor. They all help themselves liberally to it. Naming the child. The time has now come to give the child a name. The midwife gets up, takes a piece of cloth which she gives to 2 women to fold so as to make a swing or cradle of it in the form of a hammock, in which the child is placed. The midwife stands in the middle swinging the hammock while singing, "Should anyone try to scare thee, be not afraid. Should anyone try to deceive thee, be not deceived." Then she stops the hammock, takes up the child and hands it to its mother. All the women now combine to give the child a name. The name given is so chosen as to refer to the day on which the child was born or to some characteristic features of child. Thus, for example, it may be called Navapurya to denote that it was born on a Saturday, Kalya, the black one, because of its complexion, or Ralsha, the crying one, because it cried vehemently on entering this world, and so on. Names of animals, such as dog and tiger, cat, rat, bullock are rather common, and so are goblin, fairy and others of that kind. An ugly name will protect the bearer against evil spirits. When the ceremony is over, the midwife is presented with 2 champas of grain, 1 bottle of liquor and 1 rupee in cash for her services. Then she leaves the family. The other women who have squatted down also leave for their homes. After the ceremony, the confined woman, who, however, now is up and around, is considered unclean, napak, unholy, for another month and a quarter, i.e. 35 days. During this period no one may touch her, let alone eat anything she has put her hand to or dine together with her. Her meals are served to her in a special corner. When the 5 weeks prescribed have elapsed, the whole family dines together again. All eat from her hand, that is to say, what she has cooked and is now serving. In other words, she reoccupies her position as wife and mother. Marriage in the Bhil country is a very complicated affair. Firstly, like many primitive people, the Bhils are exogamous, that is to say, they never marry within their own tribe. To do so would be regarded as incest, and the one guilty of it would be excommunicated from his family and tribe. Secondly, it is not the young man himself that is in charge of the negotiations in connection with a proposal. It is the mother, father and brothers. Thirdly, it is expensive to secure a bride. If thus the parents and the brothers, including cousins, do not approve of an early marriage or money should be lacking, the marriageable young man may have to wait for a long time with an aching heart, before he achieves his heart's desire. Formerly the price of a bride was low. 50 years ago it was fixed at Rs 50 or less. Nowadays it has risen to several hundred rupees. The story goes that a wealthy and prominent Bhil in the Gwangta state paid Rs 2,300 for his bride. Under such circumstances it is no easy thing for the poor man to get married. In spite of the price to be paid for the bride, it seldom or never happens that one comes across old spinsters or bachelors, be it men or women. They are practically without exception married at 20 or 25 years of age. The majority are, of course, married long before that age. As regards the marriage age, it is only during the last 50 years that child marriage has been practiced. Formerly marriage was not contracted before adolescence. In the folklore of this people, I have not been able to find a single instance of the hideous Hindu practice of child marriage having been followed. Nowadays it is, alas, far from uncommon. Polygamy exists as everywhere in non-Christian countries. Most people have to be contact with one wife due to the fact that the women otherwise would not suffice. It is estimated that 15% of the men have more than one wife, and out of these 1% have 3 or 4. Although the Bhil woman does not have the same disposition as her European sister, it must be admitted that polygamy often results in jealousy, quarrels, fighting, divorce and so on. The man on his part is just as jealous as any European might be. He looks upon his wife as his property, which he or his parents have honestly purchased. Woe unto him who dares to fall in love with his wife. That may mean death. Especially this is the case in Acrony, otherwise he may be satisfied with getting the money he has paid out for his wife so as to enable him to buy another one. Divorces of this kind are rather common among the bills, especially on the plains. Before anything is said about engagement and wedding rites, some other peculiarities in connection with marriage must be mentioned. One is the so-called leveret, and the other is rather common usage of the bridegroom serving for several years with his prospective father-in-law for his bride. The leveret exists only among the Cutli tribe, as far as I know, but they regard it as proper for a younger brother to marry the widow of his deceased elder brother, whether she has any children or not by her first husband. An elder brother, however, may not marry the widow of a younger brother. That would be incest, for the elder brothers are regarded as fathers of the younger ones. The custom of serving the prospective father-in-law for the bride is common among all tribes, clans and tribal families. This is resorted to when, for instance, the young man has no money whereby to pay for the bride, or when the parents of the girl do not want to be separated from her. They then persuade a young man to become their Kojava, son-in-law residing in the house. A Kojava has to serve for about 3 years before he is allowed to marry the girl. During this time he works just as an ordinary servant, the only difference being that at meals he is served by the maiden of his choice, but this is the only relationship between them. Any intercourse of an intimate kind would be severely punished. It goes to the credit of the young and testifies to a strict discipline still in force that not one in 10 should break this unwritten law. Having come to the very act of the performance of the wedding, I repeat what has already been said, that it is a complicated affair. There are no fewer than 5 stages with several subordinate ones that those concerned have to go through, or, to express it in a more dramatic way, it consists of 5 acts with several scents, quite a drama, then. The first act deals with the proposal, which is played in the home of the girl by the parents and brothers of the young man. This is called hoge, making of one kin. The second act contains the return visit by the girl's parents to the village and home of the youth. This is called kahohirulo, inspecting the house. The third act is dej, giving of dowry or the engagement. The fourth is naturally the wedding, which is called voral, with cerebrali, and the fifth act is ano, the coming. With this is meant the coming of the young wife to the family of her husband to stay there, after having paid a ceremonial visit to her parents' home after the wedding. Space does not admit any descriptions of the many ceremonies performed in connection with a bill wedding. 1 or 2 things may, however, be mentioned. All the acts, with the possible exception for the first one, are accompanied with profuse drinking, dancing and playing. Liquor is literally flowing, and all, men, women, children, drink. Liquor is the burden of a marriage tale. Another peculiarity is that the wedding hymns are sung only by women and children, and that it is a custom in these hymns to refer disparagingly to the one who is now taken into the family, while the one belonging to one's own family is lauded without restraint. Thus, for example, the female relatives of the bridegroom tell in their singing that he is wealthy and noble, in possession of oxen, cows, buffaloes, and horses etc., in plenty, that he sits on a spirited charge with a saddle inlaid with gold and a golden saddlecloth, that he drinks finest liquor and eats the most delicious courses, and so on. About the bride, on the other hand, they sing that, by her poor parents and tribesmen, she has been bathed in the filthy urine of an ass, that she is poor as coolie, without other possessions than a donkey, which she rides on, or travels on foot, and drinks a mixture of cow dung and water, eating pods and dross, and so on. Her girlfriends and female relatives sing in like manner about the bridegroom, and in the same glowing terms about the bride as did the people of the bridegroom to his honor. This peculiar custom corresponds with the boastful disposition of the bill. Does the Gond lack in self-confidence, the bill may be said to have got a double portion. This is revealed specially when he is drunk. Death and burial customs. As the wedding, so has the burial 5 acts. There are also many scenes to each act. Liquor plays an important part here too. It flows as drink and offering, as a tribute to the deceased and in ceremonies of purification. The first act is duk, suffering, sickness, the second mo, death, the third tajajo, burial, the fourth kukrapirulo, chicken offering, and the fifth is vori, festival of remembrance with singing and dancing. It is touching to observe the care and consideration bestowed on the deceased. He is presented with all kinds of commodities, clothes, ornaments, silver bars, money, water pitcher, pothouse, liquor, tobacco and pipe, chickens, bread, spices, pulses, a cot, which has been used as a bier, etc. It is believed that he will need all these commodities in the other world, where conditions are regarded as similar to those in this world. In order to test whether the deceased has approved or not of the arrangements made, the floor of the house of mourning is strewn with ashes whereon grains of calm are thrown. This is done in the evening of the day of the burial. If, in the morning, footmarks of rats can be seen in the ashes, this is a sign that what has been offered to and done for the deceased has met with his approval. On the whole, as in the details, the burial ceremonies present a sad spectacle without anything of inspiration. They bespeak fumbling in the dark before of death and eternity. Languages, as has been said already, there live in West Canada more than 250,000 bills. In most cases they speak their own language, or rather languages. During a linguistic survey executed by one of our missionaries on behalf of government, no fewer than 15 languages or dialects were noted, including those spoken on the border lines as Candash-Bill dialects. Several of them are so closely related that by knowing one it is possible to understand other of them. Others, on the other hand, differ in such marked way that they have to be classified as different languages. Devili, the most important language, is the one which is spoken in the western parts of Nanderbar and Talotidalucas, and in the Mule States. This is called Devili, meaning the language of the plain. This name has been given to it because the majority of those having it as their mother tongue live on the plain. About 80,000 Bills and others living among them speak Devili. It is no literary language, though. Before SAM took up work among the Bills there was not one single line written in that language, and when, in 1917, the mission started to pay a little attention to this question, there was in existence only a translation of the story of the prodigal son and a few sample pieces written for a linguistic commission which had been appointed to classify the languages of India. Since then the 4 Gospels have been published, and later the whole of the New Testament has been translated and published by the British and Foreign Bible Society. In addition, a few religious pamphlets have been published. The example of the mission has given a push to the Hindus, who have also begun to take an interest in this language. Thus, for example, a Hindu in Nanderbar Taluka has published a little book for children, containing fables and short stories. Another one has collected a fairly large vocabulary for a dictionary. On the whole, it may be said, however, the Devili is still an uncultivated language, nor is any glorious future to be expected for it. Like all similar minor languages, it is doomed to extinction. This will, however, take some time. The major Bill languages are bound to live for several generations yet, for the Bill are a conservative people, especially as regards their language. Valvi up in Acrony, where Mandalwar is situated, 4 or 5 dialects of Billy are spoken. The most important is no doubt Pori, which is spoken by the majority in this area. The Pori tribe also seems to be the most prominent of the hill tribes living here. Mandalwar, however, is situated in a different dialectal area. The language of the people here is Valvi or Valvi. Most of the Christian Bills in Acrony speak this dialect. The Valvi-speaking tribe numbers no more than 5 or 6,000 people. Their language is, however, understood by a smaller tribe, Moiri, whose dialect is closely related to Valvi. The Moiras can only muster half the number. The number of the Pori tribe may be estimated at 10,000 persons if those living outside Acrony are included. In Valvi there is now available an infant primer, a small hymn book and a catechism. In addition to these, the New Testament has been translated and printed by the British and Foreign Bible Society. All Billy dialects belong to the large Aryan family of languages. There are, however, traces indicating that the Bills formerly have spoken another language. These traces are few, and have not had much influence on the construction of these dialects. They come closest to Gujarati. The Valvi and Devili dialects are closely related, as are the people speaking these languages. The construction of the Billy languages is simpler than that of many other North Indian languages. They are comparatively easy to learn, provided grammars, readers, and dictionaries were compiled. Religion. The religion of the Bills has hitherto been regarded as gross animism. For the present, however, it is in a transitory stage, being influenced very strongly by the crude form of Hinduism. Thus, for example, a number of the Hindu deities are being worshipped, as Hanuman, Maruti, Mahadev, Shiva, Kali in the form of Devi, Parvati, and Bhavani, Shiva's consort. Ao in all, some 10 Hindu deities are being worshipped by the Bills. The Bills also celebrate the main Hindu festivals, Dussehra, Diwali, Holi, Ao. Although they are given a peculiar expression which is very animistic in its character, a certain caste system is being developed, which points to Hinduism. All Bills confess to be Hindus, and since Hinduism is so comprehensive as to have room for all and sundry, it may not be correct to call the Bills non-Hindus. On the other hand, are the peculiarities so many and so important as to mark these people as different from the Hindus. They have their own religion, which ought to be more known. The government officials and Hindu and other religious leaders are ignorant of its contents. Not even the missionaries know in its details, although some have been permitted to peep into it. On the whole, it remains a closed world. The deities of the bills we have, however, got to know some of the superficial features. Thus we know that the bills have at least 25 or 30 deities of their own which they still worship, although they are not looked upon as Hindus. Hindu missionaries and reformers are trying their best to put a stop to this, but, according to their own statements, they have not succeeded. The village will be destroyed, and so they will have to call in sorcerers and diviners again and sacrificial priests in order to put everything right, and this will be too expensive, they say. Among the bill deities are, the tiger, the boundary of field god, Hivario, the village goddess Pandrio, the rain god Nanduro, and the hill gods, which are several in number. Hardly a month passes without the bills having to worship one of the 35 or 40 gods or goddesses which have been adopted. Of the latter kind I have the names of 16 and of the former 19. The very rites of worship, that is what mantras are mumbled, now the ceremonies are performed etc., are known to me. The majority of the bills do not know them. This is the business and secret of the sacrificial priest. But this much is known, that the worship is always connected with liquor and offerings. As regards the use of liquor, only two deities are accepted, namely Mahadev and Maruti, Shiva and Hanuman, both of which are Hindu deities. The following are among unbloody offerings: grain, coconuts, bread of wheat, cooked dumplings, rice, eggs, sweets and milk, and as has already been mentioned, liquor. As bloody sacrifices are presented, buffaloes, bulls, he-goats, and cocks. Geldings and females are not acceptable sacrifices. The animal must be a male and without blemish. After the birth of a child, however, a hen is offered. The officiating person is then a woman, namely the midwife. Similarly, the milk that is to be offered must not be sour, nor eggs rotten. For the gods only the very best will suffice. The bills often eat other grain than rice and cheaper bread than wheat, but such things may not be presented as offerings to the gods. Other things required for a ceremonial sacrifice are red lead, sweet, oil and frankincense, from Boswellia serrata. The latter is used for incense and the lead for smearing the image. 2 to 4 copper coins are also needed. Of the deities of the bills 5 have a day each set apart for them. On these days no one goes to work, neither beast nor man. All these days fall within the rainy season. They are, the rain god, the sun god, the field god, the tiger god, and the cattle god. On the day of the tiger god or on the previous evening, is also the snake worshipped. As has been seen, the worship of these deities express the foremost needs of a primitive people: a good crop, healthy cattle, and protection against wild animals. The other gods have no whole day set apart for them, but their annual sacrifice is accorded to them. This must not be neglected, or the people of the village will have to put up with no end of trouble. With the exceptions of the Hindu gods, Hanuman and Mahadev, the bill gods do not live in temples or shrines. 3 of them have platforms of earth or stone. The hill gods live in the open. 23 deities are worshipped during the cold season, 8 in the rainy season, and only 2 in the hot season. This arrangement has its natural reason. During the rains, the most important gods of an agricultural and cattle tending people have to be worshipped. During the cold weather, after the crops have been harvested, people are in a position to afford the expenses connected with the sacrificial ceremonies. In the hot season, on the other hand, taxes and debts have to be paid, then much is not left over for the gods. As regards the sacrificial priests, these serve their village. They are never house priests. Every house father is priest in his own house. Anyone may become a sacrificial priest punjari, but as a rule this calling is hereditary. The secrets of the worship are not revealed to anybody, except the prospective priests, which have been chosen by the punjaris as their successors. The duties of the priest are not performed as a profession or a calling. The punjari is a cultivator like the rest. A Brahmin is never called in as sacrificial priest or spiritual advisor. The majority of the male population of the village are present at the sacrificial acts. The leaders may not be absent without a valid reason. The sacrificial ceremonies having been completed, the punjari distributes part of the things offered, which may be eaten by those present, including the priest. Some religious festivals are rounded off by heavy eating and drinking bout. The expenses are paid by the whole village in common. The fees for the priest are only 1 anna, the coins offered, the food and liquor he has helped himself to. Evil spirits in animism, an important part is played by the evil spirits, the demons, which are called Put or Putlo. Of these I have only got to know the names of a few. They are no doubt very numerous. The two that are most dangerous have their abode in graveyards and places for cremation. Should a person pass such a place when these demons are on their way out, he will be at their mercy, and their evil influence will either cause illness or temptation to evil deeds, e.g., collecting and carrying cremation ashes with the hands and so on. Most evil spirits live in trees, especially in hollow ones. Others live in woods and on hills. One lives in Hades with the dead. Several have, however, taken up their abode with man, in his house or among his property, etc. One may thus live in the bed, another one, in the bedpoles, a third in the door frame, or in the door, a fourth in the threshold, a fifth in the ashes, and so on. Boldness is said to have its evil spirit, poison, insanity. The bird all have their evil spirits. While the gods are favorably disposed to men, the evil spirits are always hostile. They are the cause of bad luck. Disease and death are wrought by them. Similarly, imbecility and insanity, they are always planning mischief. They have to be feared everywhere, for there is hardly a place whereof their kind does not have his rightful abode. Among the demons or dangerous spirits are Tyrol and Sodi. The first ones are ghosts of women which have died in confinement, after the child has been born, but before it has been named, that before the 5th day after birth. The last mentioned are ghosts of brides who have died after they have been dressed for the wedding, but before the ceremony has been performed. Both of these very dangerous spirits or ghosts have their abode in wells, brooks, swamp, more seldom in trees. Woe unto the one who runs up against a being of this kind. A Sodi is dangerous, especially to men, whom she will pursue, seduce and kill, should they happen to enter her sphere after dark. A Tyrol will treat a man in about the same manner as does a Sodi, but she prefers women. If opportunity offers, she will take possession of a woman. This means illness and insanity, and, if she is not driven out, a certain death. Fortunately, a Tyrol may be identified. She always lights a torch when about to proceed on her tours, and if she is observed, several torches will be seen around her. Her feet are turned and her front side has the appearance of a fully developed woman, while her back is hollow like a trough. Witches and magicians' belief in witchcraft, magic, ghosts, and sorcery. These, especially the witches, play an important part among the bills. There are, of course, magicians, but they are not as numerous, nor is their ability so great or disposition so vicious as is the case with the witches. A Dagon witch is almost worse than a demon. All sorts of bad luck and ruin, illness and death are caused by witches. They are therefore much feared. In reality, those that occupy themselves with sorcery are very few in number. Most of those that are alleged of witchcraft are probably innocent, but there are those who practice witchcraft as an occupation. Whatever may be the case, if a woman has been pointed out as one who has eaten a person, she will from that moment on remain a most deplorable creature. She will be pursued, ill-treated and expelled from society. Ghosts of people that have met with an accidental death. If Tyrol and Sodi may be said to represent also conceptions found in popular Hinduism, the case will be different when we come to another of spirits, ghosts of people that have died by accident. It is true that in places these are worshipped also by the lower classes of the Hindus, but, as far as I know, they do not elsewhere play such an important part as among the bills. To die by accident is, curiously enough, not looked upon with horror by the bills. It is rather a good form of death. The one who has parted in this way, be it man, woman or child, is said to have gone to the gods, and this is a reason to perpetuate his memory on earth. He simply becomes a god. This happens in the following way. After the burial in the ordinary graveyard, either a staff is made or a stone, 3 feet in length, is hewn. A picture of the deceased is carved on the wooden staff or hewn out of the stone. Over the head are drawn pictures of the sun and the moon, and under the feet a pictorial description of his death is engraved. Thus, for example, if he was drowned, the memorial will have a well or a river. If he died by falling down from a tree, from a cart, or a horse, a picture of the thing connected with his death will be formed. When the memorial is ready and clothes, ornaments, food and liquor have been bought for the new god, for that is what it will become, and sacrificial requisites and frankincense have been secured, 3 or 4 baggots, witch doctors, are called in to perform the ceremony. This is done with secret rites, swaying, mumble of mantras, and a maximum of pageantry in the presence of all the male population of the village. Those of the women who are next of kin are also in the procession, which now moves towards the house of mourning. Just outside the village the officiating priest makes a halt, causes a hole to be dug in the ground, in which the stone or the wooden staff, properly clothed, will be placed. Then it is smeared with lead diluted in oil. At the feet of it is offered liquor and the very best of food, cooked and raw. To the upper bracelets are tied After this dedication, the priests, together with the crowd of people that have been invited, make a big tree in the shade of which they sit down. Here liquor and costly food are partaken of copiously. When the time comes for the priest to come home, they receive a sum of money, not less than 10 rupees for their services, and everybody leaves for home. The new god is now called Petli if the memorial is of wood, and Kotro if of stone. The god will be worshipped by the people of his family, often by others as well, before sowing, harvesting and threshing, and winnowing, and on numerous festivals this god has to be remembered with foodstuffs of rice and wheat and liquor, which never must be lacking, and a burning oil lamp. Every village has one or more gods of this kind placed at its boundary, medicine men and witch priests. If magicians and witches have no enviable position among the bills, medicine men and witch priests, Madhvi, Bhagat, and Havrio, are given a place of honor and are very influential men, for they are not mischievous, that is, they do not try to destroy people and cattle or eat them. Their duties are to investigate about the causes of bad luck and illness and remove them. They are also acquainted with the lives of gods, demons and other spirits and are able to teach this subject extensively. The Madhvi also knows how to appease the wrath of demons, ghosts and goblins and give them the kind of worship they crave. In like manner a Bhagat is acquainted with the gods and knows how to fill their needs. But these benefactors of the people are not employed but practice in a private capacity. They know how to charge their clients heavily. As a rule, they are held in high esteem. People believe in their ability to make out the whereabouts of spirits, the causes of illness etc., from water, leaves from the flame of the forest, wings of peacocks or coarse paper, or copper coins. Just as deeply rooted is their belief in their ability to cure disease, drive out evil spirits and bind them etc. Treatment of spirits. There exist many rules and regulations, rites and customs, with a view to avoiding the evil influence of spirits. Thus certain trees, wells, places, woods and clefts in the rocks must not be visited without company or after dark, as they are supposed to be dangerous. Amulets have to be used or else a special ring or another protective article. Even so one has every reason to be on one's guard, to be cautious, as one is surrounded on all sides by divine beings, which one may have offended unwittingly, and evil spirits, goblins, ghosts and other bad beings which are always looking for an opportunity to harm a person. The tricks of deceiving or binding the spirits are many. Only a few examples may be given. When a woman who has died in confinement is to be buried, seeds of sesame and grass are thrown on the path between the boundary of the village and the graveyard up to the grave. This is to prevent her from reaching her home when during the first 5 weeks she will wander about every night trying to kill her child. This is done in the following way. Having left the grave for her old home, she will stop to pick the seeds one after the other till the cock crow. Then she will return to her grave, replacing the seeds one by one till she reaches the grave again. She will rest till the following night, when the same thing will be repeated. It is to the nature of the thing that a sufficient number of seeds are put out in order to keep the ghost more than occupied for the night. Another example, when a churl has been discovered as having her abode in a woman, she will be driven out and confined to a tree by hammering several nails into the trunk of the tree. In all their childish simplicity these examples are touching and clarify better than words the low standard of the bills in matters spiritual. The ethics of the bills. The ethical views of the bills do not range very high. Direct commandments and prohibitions, expressed in concisely formed sentences, do not exist. Rules and regulations, without the attention to which a society cannot survive, are nevertheless to be found. They are theoretically embedded in their proverbs and rather numerous tales and stories, which are encountered within every tribe. Practically they are revealed in customs and usages, the age-long authority of which none dares to oppose. This might mean death in certain cases. Taking into consideration their highly unsatisfactory religion, it must be admitted that the bills are a people of a comparatively high moral standing. They compare favorably with the genuine Hindus. On the whole they are more truthful. For a primitive they are of remarkable good manners. A bill that has not been degenerated will scrupulously regard the right of ownership, and still he is not greedy or ungenerous. In some respects the sexual ties are very strong, that much in their favor. The dark spots on the character of the bills are, however, many and big. Drunkenness is probably more common among them than with any other people in India. Quarrels and frays, which often end in murder, are horribly common, especially among the hill tribes. Adultery is also very common, often leading to divorce, when the offender, after having paid to the offended man the sum fixed by the village or tribal council, will take the woman he has fallen in love with as his wife. Then his position in society may be just as honorable as anybody else's. The belief in sorcery and witchcraft darkens the life of many. It has caused murders without number. By their profound ignorance, which is looked upon almost as a virtue, the people are kept down in poverty, weakness of mind and body, which do not admit their intellectual growth or their looking for higher ideals. In their treatment of woman, the Bills are more advanced than the Hindus. She is freer. The widow is allowed to remarry and may choose her own husband. But her condition is not enviable. She is practically sold as a bride. In the tribal or village council she has no say. In the worship of the gods this holds also true with one exception. CFR. Chapter 3. If she dies as a bride or in confinement she will become an evil spirit, which is to be feared. Only if she dies by accident will she become a divine being. These details show that their reverence for a woman is deficient. Belief in transmigration of soul. The Bills and eternal hope. There is no eternal hope with the Bills. It is true that they believe in immortality, but their conceptions of it are very vague. When a person has died he is said to have gone to God. It is not believed however that he will remain there for any length of time, let alone for eternity. Within short, some say after a day, he has to return to this world being born as a different man. Nobody knows the length of this transmigration, nor does anybody know where or within which people he will be born again. It is only known that he will be reborn as a human being. Behind the belief in a multitude of gods and goddesses the Bill has caught a glimpse of a supreme being, which he calls either Bhagavana or Panmasar. In his heart of hearts he believes in this being, hence the spirit of the deceased goes to him. Bhagavana means the shining one, the adorable one, the glorious one, etc. Panmasar means the overlord, the supreme being, the supreme or only God. Folk thoughts. 1. Products of wisdom. Proverbs 1. A Samandoth. It will be done unto him, as ye sow, so shall ye reap. 2. The father should suffer the fruit of his deeds, the son should suffer the fruit of his deeds. 3. Come, thou stone, and fall on my feet, to invite trouble. 4. If a blind woman succeeds in getting a husband she will be busy over the bed. A blind person is not fit for marriage, for she can do nothing but make the bed. There is however a deeper meaning. A person who has not the proper qualities should not be given a responsible position. B. A person who is deficient, morally or intellectually, should not be given responsible position. 5. On his wedding day a noseless person has 1700 defects. A person who is to be married is badly spoken of. A deeper or more comprehensive meaning is the following. A person who has once proved unreliable, will have the opinion against him, even if he shows signs of a better life. 6. Even the noseless son is the offspring of the womb, and a forged coin is kept in the cloth. Everyone loves his own. 7. The mother-in-law has 2 days, but the daughter-in-law has, or will also get, her day. If the former is harsh and dominating, the latter may console herself with the hope that time will come when the old woman will be weak and helpless. Then she will be paid in her own coin. This is also applied to proud and oppressive people in influential positions. The day of reckoning cannot be evaded. 8. The backbiter ruins the village, and the leper the water place. 9. The blind man speaks and the deaf man listens. This is said about persons who do not understand what they are talking about, also of those who have misunderstood what has been said or an order given. It is also used about false rumors. 10. As the potter, so the pitchers; as the father, so the son, corresponding to, like priest, like people, and as the old cock crows, so crows the young. 11. A learned man without virtue or ability. Learning does not always mean a good character. 12. As soon as he experiences erotic affections he wants to get married. He acts on the spur of the moment in a thoughtless way. 13. As the country, so the dress. To do in Rome was the Roman. 14. Stretch her she will break, blow at her, she will fly away. A description of especially female beauty, but also that of a child. Some of these proverbs are international property and have probably been taken over from other tribes and peoples, but others are coined by themselves. Whether borrowed or coined, do they indicate to a high degree that the Bills are in possession or moral principles, common sense and a sense of beauty. Riddles. If the Bill is comparatively poor as regards proverbs and sayings, it seems as if he were rich in riddles. My collection, which together with the proverbs has been published in the Journal of the Anthropological Society of Bombay, contains 127, and this is probably only 1/7 of the total number in use. Most of these riddles are so intimately connected with Indian life, with its oriental animal and vegetable life, so as to be unintelligible to those who are not acquainted with these conditions. The selection made for this article have been made from those that have a bearing on subjects known even to the Westerner, although this procedure does in no way give justice to the rather high gifts of the Bills in this field. 1. The rope wanders, the ox is lying still, the cucumber in its tendrils. 2. A man has put on one coat after the others, An onion. 3. Under the black rock there are 4 small fishes. The 4 udders of a buffalo and a cow. 4. A fresh stick that none of us can bend. A snake. 5. When does a person drive out the cows and milk the barn? Collecting honey. 6. Who goes forward working and backwards eating? A chicken when picking for something to eat. 7. Like the Alma River, like the Queen of Lightning does she wander hither and thither chatting? The squirrel. 8. 2 stand up, 2 flutter and 4 walk. The 2 horns, 2 ears, and 4 feet of the ox. 9. A roaring tiger in a well. The churn staff in a churn. 10. A rounded bullock, digging in an anvil. A compa measure and measuring a heap of corn. 11. When the calf of the black cow is driven out, won't return to any of us. A bullet. 12. Having walked through the whole forest, he stands on a space not larger than a small copper coin. A walking stick. 13. A man who is neither cold nor warm and has no sense, begins to dive. A spoon. 14. A toothpick used by 2 men. The axle of a cart. 15. A woman leaving the house bending hither and thither. A broom. 16. What animal drinks water with the tail? A lamp. 17. There were hunters. 1 fired, 1 looked, and 1 ran. The hands, eyes and feet of the hunter. 18. In a little chamber not bigger than a tumbler, there sits a talking lady. The tongue. 19. A bird sits in a corner fluttering his wing. The eye. 20. If you chew, it won't be chewed. If you cut it, it won't divide. Water. 21. While the animal is grazing its marrow is taken out of its bones and eaten, then the bones are thrown on the dunghill, while the animal goes on grazing. The hen and her eggs. 22. A white house without doors. An egg. 23. She has neither hands nor feet, and still she goes out to work. A jacket. 24. Which is the biggest of all the musical instruments? Thunder. 25. The red cows graze, the black cows butt, and the black calves suck. A conflagration. 26. From one single ear the whole barn is filled with chaff. The wick and the light. 27. What is the shadow of a small pipri tree, fretted with rays of light with shabuds, or jasmine flowers, round about? The moon in the starry sky. 28. An eagle has 12 wings and 18 scores of eggs. The year with its 12 months and 18 scores of days. Whichever be the opinion as to the value of the riddles of the bills, it cannot be denied that they indicate powers of observation and imagination not to be despised too. The bill as poet and singer as authors of poetry. The bills do not rank high. They do not lack poetical products, it is true, but these in no way be said to be of any importance of whatever. In them we find neither any flight of imagination nor any deeper feeling. The outward form is usually trivial and flat. As regards the subject matter it is poor. In this respect the bills lag behind many other aboriginal peoples in India. For instance, they do not have anything that can be compared with the remarkable lingo hymns of the Gonds. Their poetical products are confined to simple hymns for use at festivals and sacrifices, besides wedding hymns and 1 to 2 hymns to describe certain objects. It is important, though, to get to know them, for in one way they are the key to the heart of the people. In order to give some insight into the poetical life of the people bills a few samples will be produced. First a few remarks. Among the hills men and women never sing together. Singing is further not a part of their daily life. It is resorted to only at festivals and weddings. In the weddings only women and girls do the singing. This is also the case at Holi. At Evely, on the other hand, the singing is performed by men only. For the uninitiated it would seem as if women also partook in the singing, for many men are dressed up as women. These men may occasionally carry a baby in their arms while dancing, to make the disguise perfect. Wedding hymns waiting for the bridegroom. In the valley of Cathy the brother is saddling his horse. Hey-ho, when the horse has been saddled, the brother will come. Hey-ho, the guns matters, the brother is coming there. Hey-ho, hearing the sound, the bride begins to cry. Hey-ho. She cries till the eyes get swollen. Hey-ho, hey-ho. The hymn is sung by the female relatives of the bridegroom and his girlfriends, when he is expected to the shamiana erected for the wedding festivities. When the bride is sent to the home of her husband, the way is so long. Oh sister, don't return alone. Oh sister, if father-in-law gets angry. Oh sister, don't return alone. Oh sister, if mother-in-law gets angry. Oh sister, don't return alone. Oh sister, if sister-in-law gets angry. Oh sister, don't return alone. Oh sister, if little sister gets angry. Oh sister, don't return alone. Oh sister, if brother-in-law gets angry etc., if little brother etc., if husband etc. Thus hymn is sung by the mother, sisters and friends of the bride when she is sent for the first time to her husband's home to live with him. Little sister is the younger sister of the husband, little brother his younger brother. Hymns to the gods. Hymn of sacrifice to Holly. Holly, Holly keep Holly for 12 months, hey ho. 2 coconuts place at the feet of Holly, hey ho. Holly, Holly keep Holly etc. 2 garlands of sweets place at the feet of Holly, hey ho. Holly, keep Holly etc. 2 young roosters place at the feet of Holly, hey ho. Holly, keep Holly etc. 2 he-goats place etc. Holly, keep Holly etc. 2 he-buffaloes place at the feet etc. Holly, keep Holly etc. Holi is the spring festival of India. It is celebrated during the month of March. On this occasion passions are let loose as at no other time. To the Bhils, Holi does not only represent a festival, when, as among the Hindus, Krishna is being worshipped, but Holi is to them the personification of a goddess. In the above hymn, Holi is presented both as a goddess and as a festival. Hymn of praise to Kolboari. I have come quietly dancing, Kolboari, I have come in a light shadow, Kolboari. I will build the fallen fence, Kolboari. I will give milk and butter plenty, Kolboari. I will fill the empty grain bin, Kolboari. I will get many coins, Kolboari. I will leave laughing and dancing, Kolboari. I will leave dancing and jumping, Kolboari. I will take names of gods, Kolboari. I will take the name of Devali, Kolboari. I will take the name of Queen Devali, Kolboari. I will take the names of precious crowd, Kolboari. This hymn is sung responsively at the Devali festival, which is celebrated during the cold season, end of November, in December, or in the beginning of January. The first verses are sung by a man disguised as a woman, and the last 4 by a man in his own clothes. At Devali the Bhils worship many gods. The name means the festival of lights, and so it is to the Bhils. But they have personified Devali and made her a goddess. Kolboari is really the meat offering, consecrated by the priest, of which he gives a pinch to each one of those present or those standing nearby. In reception of this they prostrate before the object of worship, offering what they have received. In this hymn, however, Kolboari has been personified. It is the goddess praising before the Bhil. She is going to fill all his needs in the barn, in the grain bin, in the milk vessel, in the butter tub and in the money bag. Then there will be joy and hilarity in his house. In the last 4 verses it is the Bhil, anxiously asking what divine name he is to take, that is to he called upon when she has left. Which god shall he worship? Shall he worship Devali? Shall he worship the precious Freud? The last expression refers to the numerous gods living in the mountains, cliffs and caves, and their worshippers. Kolboari apparently approves of this, for she is silent and disappears. This hymn, which is one of the best hymns to the gods, is undoubtedly very old. The opening word, which has been translated with Izana, it is of Dravidian origin, corresponding to Nana and Anna of the Gonds and the Tamil Nan. 3. The Bhil is storyteller. If the Bhil is a poor poet, he is a comparatively good storyteller. The Bhils regard it a pleasure to sit down to listen to the tales, fables and stories, told by their bards, and which contain more humor than we should accept. Some humoresques are rather funny. The recital is done in the form of monotonous singing so common in India. In several of the tales God is presented under the names of Bhagwan, Bhagwan or Panmasar. While reading these stories it should be kept in mind that they are the products of a primitive Aboriginal people. The knowledge of God they give evidence of goes to show that God has revealed himself to them in some way. The first of the stories presented is a translation from Devali, the second from Valvi. The origin of fever in days gone by. There existed in the world of sun, on earth, neither fever, cough, pain or any other suffering among men. People used to eat, drink and live in undisturbed happiness. They had no idea about God. On account of this, God gave himself up to deep thinking. He said, I have created the whole world and the whole of humanity, and nonetheless I have been forgotten. But if they be overtaken by suffering, they will remember me and call upon my name. Then he called the angel Lokathio and said to him, Go and call Fever, and bring him to me. Lokathio made off on the spot to call Fever Boro. He was as big as a donkey and was wallowing in the ashes of the dust heap. Lokathio went up to him and said, Brother Fever, why do you lie here idle? Come on, God is calling for you. Having heard this, Fever, big as a donkey, rose with haste and shook his body. Then the whole country was darkened by the dust that fell from him, so much ashes had stuck to him. Then he went straight to him. God placed himself before him with folded hands, saying, O God, what orders have you from me? God answered, Well, you should go down to earth, the world of the sun, and cause man to be smitten by fever. No sooner had Fever heard this than he prostrated himself before the Lord, whereupon he immediately left to execute the order. Having reached the world of the sun, he found people occupied with preparing hemp. From this work they had got such a bad kind of itch, that they were scratching themselves as if they were mad. Seeing this, Fever began to wonder whether men had lost their mind, or what might have befallen them. They were scratching themselves all over their bodies. Come what may, Fever said to himself, I have to execute God's orders. And so he began to approach the men. Then came a gust of wind stirring the hemp stalks, some of which fell down on the donkey-shaped Fever. And so he too was attacked by such a bad itch that the whole of his body was affected. This was more than he could stand. He therefore turned and ran off as fast as he could, swaying his tail. The puffs caused by the swaying of the tail struck the people, and so they were attacked by Fever. Fever passed through the heavenly spheres, returning to God. Here too he continued to scratch himself, wandering about like a madman. Asked by God what had befallen him, he answered, O God, I have been struck by the madness of the people in the world of the sun. The Lord told him to return to his former dwelling place. He then rushed off in a hurry to the dust heap and lay down to wallow in the ashes. After these happenings, God adopted the shape of a holy man and went down to the world of the sun. There, people were lying here and there in fever. Seeing this, he began to fan them softly and to give them medicine. In this way, they were cured from the fever. He also introduced worship of God and gave rules for sacrifices and worship. Having thus taught men, he disappeared. It is in this way that cough, fever, pain, and suffering have come into this world. It is worthy of note that the fever that entered the world was only the result of the puff caused by the donkey-sized Fever swaying his tail. But even so, this fever is a great suffering to bear for man. What might not have happened if the donkey-sized Fever had been allowed to remain on this earth? People would not have been able to stand it. The death of tomorrow would have taken place today. But lo, the purpose of God was only to keep man in submittance. All power is his, but in his mercy he has sent a fever only caused by the swaying of a tail. In this he has bestowed upon us his mercy, for which we daily in the early morning ought to offer him our humble worship. The revenge of the sparrow. Once upon a time there were a he-sparrow and a she-sparrow. They had both united and lived off the grains and seeds they could find and pick up. One day it so happened that the she-sparrow got it into her mind that she ought to have a pair of new shoes. She immediately asked her husband to have a pair made and give to her. Both then went to the shoemaker, and the sparrow gave him orders to make a pair for his wife. The shoemaker answered, "It shall be done. You may leave your wife here with me and go home. I will prepare the shoes for her and let you have them. You may come to fetch them tonight." The sparrow then left his wife and went home. The shoemaker then rose and killed the she-sparrow and put her out in the backyard to die. In the evening, about the time when the cows come home, the he-sparrow came and asked if the shoes for his wife were ready. The shoemaker answered, "The skin has not dried yet, and you come here to ask for the shoes. Go and see if it has dried, and come back and tell me then." The sparrow went out to investigate. What he saw made him astonished, and he cried out, "The shoemaker has killed my wife." Weeping and crying vehemently, he went to his house. Some time later one evening, he yoked 2 rats to a cart and started out on a journey. Driving along the road he came across a fresh splash of cow dung. This began to address him, saying, "Brother, where are you going?" "I am going to the shoemaker," replied the sparrow. The cow dung then asked him if she might go with him. "Yes, you may come along," said the sparrow. He then sat up in the cart and both went on. After a while they met a scorpion. He too began to question the sparrow as to where he was going. The sparrow answered, "The shoemaker has killed my wife." "We are on our to his house," said he. "May I too come along?" "Yes, it is all right. Come on." The scorpion sat up in the cart, which rolled on with the 3 passengers. Driving along they met a snake. As soon as the snake caught sight of them, the snake rose and addressed the sparrow, saying, "Where do you intend to go, brother?" "We are on our way to the shoemaker," replied the sparrow. "May I too come along?" The snake went and he sparrow said, "Why not? Sit up," and the cart rolled on again. Proceeding they met a dove. She began to ask, Brother bird, where are you going?" The sparrow answered, "The shoemaker has killed my wife. We are now going to see him." The dove said, "I will come along too." He allowed her to sit up in the cart and started off again. Within short they had reached the shoemaker's house. Here they first took counsel as to the duties to be allotted to each one of them. And so a plan was made. The cow dung sat down by the door, and the scorpion on the candlestick in the niche of the wall. The dove went to the fireplace and the snake struck the shoemaker. The shoemaker got terrified and began to shout, "I have been stung by a snake! I have been stung by a snake!" His wife then went to the niche to light the lamp, but there was the fresh cow dung by the door, and she had the bad luck to step into it and down she fell. A thud was heard. She rose, however, immediately and stretched out her hand to light the lamp. Quick as lighting, the scorpion gave her a sting. She also began to shout and made for the fireplace, where she started to blow at the coals to make a fire. Instantly the dove began to flutter her wings and caused the ashes to come into her eyes, which she then began to rub. Then the shoemaker died. The bird now yoked the rats to the cart again, his companions all went to their homes, and the sparrow returned to his home and lived there. Social life. To lease an improved and rational system of living on the culture of an aboriginal tribe may stimulate the less critical observer to nourish feelings of surprise. Aborigines and their primitive culture acquired, thanks to distorted reports of explorers who usually culminate their investigations by releasing a flood of minimizing and prejudicial literature on the subject, acquired the reputation of forming the elements of the lowest possible strata of human advance, and this stage of affairs became an ill-used criterion applied by mankind who, only too eager to cover its own shortcomings, loves to draw attention to those inhabitants of the earth less advanced, or should one say less shrewd, than itself. Contempt and the cherished manner of looking down on less fortunate fellow creatures resulted consequently in harmful misunderstanding which could so far not be drowned by the voices of a very limited number of interested and understanding investigators. Even the school books are packed with wrong and entirely misleading descriptions of the life, modes of living and cultural manifestations of Aborigines, and it is hardly astonishing that this type of knowledge, once established in the receptive mind of a young grain, tends to remain fixed. The mere mention of the word Jungluala provokes a shudder, projecting fantastic scenes of naked tribesmen hunting in hostile virgin forests, notions of squalor and filth, primitive life in caves and bloodthirsty feasts on unspeakably repulsive kinds of food. The press, magazines and film further corrupt the minds of children and adults by presenting the Aborigines in a manner irresponsible and positively prejudicial, exploiting by this means man's utterly regrettable inclinations to see and to hear something about hair-raising habits of some isolated and neglected tribe. The impression is created that one should be very glad to belong to a more cultured circle, apart from a deliberately fostered tendency to keep aloof from those wretched creatures, the sight of which is already enough to drive anybody to fits. Did not every one of us read thrilling stories of Aborigines who roast their slain opponents to death? Certainly cannibalism did exist, though it has long been proved that cannibalism was based on a carnal lust and cruelty, but no. Body felt prevented to believe that this kind of barbaric lack of consideration that contributed so much to the rather doubtful reputation of Aborigines is nothing else than a ritualistic manifestation of a certain type of culture excellent in the eyes of the adherents, but not too pleasing in the eyes of the civilized world. Besides, the city dweller whose whole outlook on life is exclusively centered on appearances, make-ups, aping of superiors, fashions and super-smart chit-chat on world reforms, brotherhood and mutual understanding etc., feels instinctively repulsed when he is compelled to contact a stray member of an aboriginal tribe. The Jungluala is usually the exponent of poverty and shabbiness. His simple manners do not make him eligible to membership of dandy clubs, and not to well-fed in addition. The tribesman unwillingly contributes to the maintenance of wrong ideas as to himself. This shy and helpless behavior, his embarrassment apparently stress that he merely belonged to the scum of mankind. The impression is indeed quite wrong. Some Junglualas may be rascals. The majority, however, incorporated more cannibal elements into the simple but pure culture of their tribes, thought less civilized as they may be. The Aborigine positively represents a most valuable type of man, and it is the very object of this study to analyze, to compare, to sift and to separate the characteristics of Aborigines with the aim of establishing a definite program of rejuvenation, reform and appreciation. This paper is not intended to be another ethnological treatise, though based on ethnology. It aims at the creation of a new spirit, a new attitude. Once consciousness is acquired, it will ultimately result in a new culture and mental outlook combining the best that the so-called primitive and the advanced civilizations have to offer. Logically, only those who deeply plunged into this most fascinating subject are entitled and able to undertake such a task. Besides, the great number of tribes makes it from the very beginning impossible to consider all the good elements of all the various tribal cultures and, consequently, the writer prefers to limit his scheme, though not lessening it in value, to a comparative study of the Bills Kandesh who, after an existence in exclusion casting many centuries, have succeeded in preserving an exceedingly high culture absolutely from hampering influences from outside, a culture sparkling with life, simplicity, honesty, and a notable absence of hypocrisy. These assets alone are worthy of any effort. Present day's life became so cramped an affair, complicated in all its details, dominated by greed, falsehood and hypocrisy, boredom and lack of sincerity, and it is imperative to question the usefulness of so wretched a force which our lives have happened to become through our own fault. Should we not listen to the song of Aborigines peacefully relaxing in the shade of a maher tree? A song so free from worldly haste, so rich in sound, saturated with a melodious narrative of love, frank longing, fulfillment and happiness. This is the language we should learn to understand, and once understood, we will cease to be slaves of our own life and our self-created institutions. It is unnecessary to dwell on the origin of the bills. Many writers have stated that they inhabit their land since the dawn of history, and not being able to contradict such a statement, matters are left as they are, inasmuch as they have no direct bearing on the aims of this publication. One circumstance, however, is noteworthy. The bills do not stand back in their earliest efforts to discover the great riddle that envelopes the creation. The small selection of mythological accounts that follows proves that the bills, despite an entire absence of any form of intercourse with any of the highly advanced, but now extinguished, peoples or nations, acquired beliefs not much unlike those of the great Western cultural movements. Anybody acquainted with the mythology of the East will not have the impression that the religious myth of the bills offers anything fundamentally new or distinguishable, but this is not the point. The realization that the bills were, despite the lack of contact with the outer world, able to develop a theory not, in principle, much different than the mythological interpretations of dominant folk groups in India and elsewhere, is witness of an advanced degree of reasoning. It is not intended to claim that the bills succeeded in discovering the facts that really governed the act of creating the universe. They are positively utterly mistaken, though aiming at the proper demonstration of the great trend that characterizes everything produced by the bills, namely simplicity and the desire to seek delight even in unexplainable happenings. Simplicity is the keynote. The unexplainable is taken for granted. For the sake of convenience, gods act in the same way as any bill would like to act. This very convenient attitude attributed to the creative powers was without hesitation applied when human problems were at stake. If everything is feasible in theory, then it should as well be feasible in practice, and no worry or anxiety are not able to produce anything creative. The bills adopted such a simplified outlook on life as one of the main objects of their existence. It must be stressed that it is not intended to advocate as truth the religious beliefs of the bills, nor will it ever deem desirable to make any attempts aiming at a worldwide establishment of a new religion based on bill beliefs. Should, however, the introduction of a new belief result in a losing of those harassing conventions that strangle our present life, well, in such a case it would be justified to do so. The conflict that would result would, however, culminate in more damage than good in the solid points therefore to the mere acceptance of a desirable attitude and outlooks. There is not the slightest doubt that our present civilization resulted in an unheard advance. Innumerable amenities are at our disposal. New inventions make us believe that our lives became richer and worthwhile living, though it must be admitted that this type of advance deprived us from any chance to live in a natural way, to express ourselves freely, to act accordingly to our desires, to express our feelings in a fashion devoid of hypocrisy. Man has himself completely undermined confidence in himself, and his brethren are no more able to meet him on terms of mutual goodwill and understanding. Present day's life is absolutely barren of simplicity. We watch each other with fear and have to maintain an uninterrupted state of alert, and the whole atmosphere in which we move seems to be saturated with poisonous vapors. This is the result of civilization. Now, any advance that really results in an advancement of our liberties can only be sought by struggling against those powers that corrupted our very existence. There is no need to discard the good, through there is no limit, in acquiring more properties, and by pointing to the culture of the bills, it must be understood that nobody is expected to accept without reservation any out-of-date conceptions that might still linger in the minds of the bills. Unconditional surrender of the whole structure of our own outlook is bound to be followed by an irrational upheaval, and it is more advisable to borrow from others. We can borrow a good deal from the bills, though, of course, they as well have to borrow from us, but it will be demonstrated that the Aboriginal has greater treasures to distribute than any member of the highly advanced races. Cosmology. With other nations of the East, the bills share the belief that the universe consisted in the beginning merely of an enormous boundless sheet of water, enveloped in darkness. This state of affairs was, however, interrupted by the appearance of an enormous light which emitted a bell-like sound. This sound, gaining in volume, acquired the shape of a man who, far from being passive, set out to create various parts of the universe by putting his hands on the chute of water, and continents appeared wherever his hands came in contact with the wet element. The stretches of water dividing the continents were conveniently called the Sweet Sea, the Saltish Sea, the Chick Sea, the Kid Sea, the Black, the Oily and the Yellow Sea. The whole universe was thereafter in an orderly fashion divided into 9 parts, though a 10th region had to be added suitable for the erection of a holy town. As soon as it became evident that reliable sources of light must be made available, the huge man ordered that a sun has to appear, whilst a softer light was required for the illumination of nightly sceneries. Additional arrangements caused the moon to increase and decrease, which greatly aided the inhabitants of the world to determine time and seasons. In order to animate the earth, insects were created by God, first those that live in the water and those that live on the firm surface of the earth. An additional blessing was added in the shape of grasses, trees, shrubs and fruits, and the insects soon understood that they are meant to grow for their own maintenance and protection. God furthermore decided that the introduction of the summer, rainy and winter seasons would greatly facilitate matters, and he did accordingly. God, however, was not satisfied with the thought that his creation was merely inhabited by insects, and he took thus some earth into his hands and molded 2 human beings, a man and a woman. By the blow of his breath life was imputed to the molds, and with his blessings the 2 started to rule over the earth and over everything on it. The first man and the first woman, called Mahadev and Parvati, became the ancestors of all mankind. Their son and daughter formed one union, resulting in a vast multiplication, and everyone has to trace his origin back to this couple. Though the increasing number of men soon resulted in a clash of opinions, and various castes and religions resulted from the quarrel, but everybody was at liberty to follow his own vocation. Some occupied themselves with the cultivation of their lands, others served or reared domestic animals. Everything went well and according to plan, but everybody felt that the sky was still missing, and the impassionate God created the sky covering the whole universe, adorned by the sun and the moon. In order to prevent the sky from falling down, the sky had to be well fixed, and he used for this purpose a good many nails. The nails are still to be seen. They acquired the form of stars, and it is worth mentioning that God abstained from using the nails indiscriminately. The nails were placed in such a position that they represented the outline of things well known on earth, and he omitted not to design a cot, a bird sitting on its eggs, a plow, a thief and a dog. On the moon, so ample in space, a banyan tree was planted, and on one of its spreading branches a witch was hanged as a warning to all the world. The witch is still hanging there today, sincere in his endeavors to maintain the world in good order. God passed orders regulating the health of man and beast. Thus, God desired that we keep our house and its surroundings clean by sweeping the refuse into gullies or water courses. Fortunately, sweepers are available to occupy themselves with such a task, but so far as the jungles had to be cleaned themselves, the dirt of the jungle and the remains of fallen animals are eaten by other creatures, and foulness and evil smell is removed. The leaves falling from the trees are swept away by the wind and deposited elsewhere till the rains burst. The thorns recondition hills and valleys, carry the dirt to the sea where it is finally consumed by insects, burdened with the task of keeping the seas transparent and clear, and by this means sunlight, air and water, insects and animals became helpers of God. This legend, incorporating the main principles of the religious beliefs of the Bills, underwent alterations, and variations of the same theme are narrated wherever Bills have settled down. There is, for instance, the story told of 7 sisters who, after being created by God, were ordered to descend to the bottom of the sea. The 7 sisters obeyed the command, and as soon as their feet touched the sea bottom, they set out to collect sand and earth mud, forming with great care piles which, after assuming proper size and shape, became the continents. God was highly pleased with the excellent work done by the diligent sisters, and he extended these the invitation to remain and to settle. He promised to send every year a rainy season, conveying a feeling of happiness and freshness to everything on earth. The 7 sisters readily succumbed to this generous suggestion, and since that day, the arrival of the monsoon is everywhere expected with joy and longing. Another legend goes a step farther. Its origin is in so far noteworthy as it clearly demonstrates that the Bills, despite the utter primitiveness of their conceptions of the universe, pondered the destinies of man. Fate, and the impossibility to escape from it, has apparently to a large extent occupied their mind. The sisters related to in the following legend certainly occupy the same status as an angel of the mythology of other races. Their functions, at least, are the same. As the time the Almighty created Mahadev and Parvati, he created simultaneously 2 sisters who are employed in the service of God. they were given the task of writing down the fate of newly born children. One of the sisters settled such items as the life in general, happiness, the various difficulties that have to be met in the course of the life, and, finally, death, whilst the second sister was empowered to fix by the means of notes the degree of wealth and earthly riches that fate kept in store for each individual. No power on earth is strong enough to change or to alter the dictations bound to develop as predestined. The Bill's fatalistic attitude towards fate is certainly one of the reasons that led them to acquire a sense of helplessness. Lack of impulsive initiative so far as their well-being and prosperity is concerned, is one of the characteristics so inherent in Bills that much time will be needed before a change to the better becomes noticeable. One more legend may be added. It originated in the desire to explain how it is possible for the earth to resist the laws of gravity. God overcame this difficulty by placing the earth on the head of a snake, and, so that legend runs, the snake sometimes feels the heavy burden resting on her head, and in an attempt to rid herself, the whole universe is set into vibrations, and the strange phenomenon becomes noticeable in the form of an earthquake. It is inconceivable how this strange, fantastic and rather absurd myth kept strong and alive during the centuries. It is therefore justified to say that those stories solely survived on account of the fact that bards and professional storytellers chose them as particularly suitable. A primitive mind is attracted by glorified primitiveness, and the circumstance that the very act of creating the universe was a deed so absolutely beyond his power of comprehension, fostered probably a feeling of appreciation of the supernatural. No part, not even an alteration of it, of Bill mythology was ever incorporated into his religious beliefs. On the contrary, the Bill ponders very little over God. He merely believes that some kind of a God is great and powerful, and his worship consists only in applying some zinc chloride or stones and boulders, being quite satisfied that the sight of white painted stones not only pleases God, but will also stimulate future generations to remember the existence of God. Sometimes a temple is visited after having equipped themselves with a sufficient quantity of zinc chloride, which is more or less lavishly smeared on the very next best stone in sight, being it within the temple or nearby. On such occasions chapels and boots are removed, one bows slightly but not without reverence, and the bow becomes obligatory whenever the road passes a stone auspiciously shining with a coat of paint. Now, nobody is expected to imitate the Bills so far as the ritual of their religion is concerned. Our attention is, however, drawn to the admirable lack of complicating factors. Religion ceases to be a menace. The Bills do not believe in any kind of hellish existence after death. One might be plagued with all kinds of devilish inconveniences during lifetime, but they are neither wished nor caused by God. It is God's business to be present at least somewhere in the universe, and, apart his whereabouts, he is expected to notice painted stones and show by means of some kind of benevolent manifestation that even the most insignificant efforts is highly appreciated. Taking into consideration that religious conflicts never upset the Bill community and that no bitter feud ever resulted from doctrinal differences of opinion, one dares say that this type of extremely simplified religion possessed more merits than usually admitted. The religion as such does not matter, the resulting attitude is most remarkable, and, provided that the civilized world desires to learn something from so primitive a tribe, many of us should consider it worth a candle to scrutinize our own response towards the religion into which we were born. Be it again stressed that no attempt is made to gain converts, it is merely desired that we should cease to make our life too burdensome by attaching great importance to trifles. Life is encrushed with a host of disputable bagatelles. Much has been said as to religion. Religion is certainly of great educational value and one of the main pillars that supports the structure of human society. Unfortunately, religion acquired many grotesque forms or developed complicating ramifications which, grown estranged from the principal idea that formed the initial foundation, lost their right to exist and is merely maintained for the sake of tradition. No country encouraged this trend more than India. Continuously splitting up in sections and subsections, the religious outlook became as confused as the sections into which man started to divide his circle or society, hardly leaving chances open to those who rather prefer to escape. Advanced civilization or its wrong interpretation is one of reasons. If mankind had remained simpler or had considered simplicity a value impossible to replace, man's craving for new variations of the existing would not have driven us so far. In some countries, it became fashionable to applaud and follow anything that is new, particularly if the new caters for those of us who believe to have finally discovered something that might satisfy their longing for sophisticated mental torture and mortification. Happiness is neither at the bottom of such distorted longings, nor any happiness ever results by rushing uninterruptedly to new ideas. The old and well-established but light-heartedly discarded religious attitude of yesterday became nearly a thing of the past. Though not everywhere, the bills, for instance, are far away from lending a hand to bigotry. They never think of expressing any doubts so far as their religion is concerned, and feel perfectly happy about it. The desire to complicate existing does not exist, and although the ritual of painting stones does not appeal to adherents of other religions, it still remains a fact that the bills derive a certain satisfaction and consolation from doing so, and, as the spirit counts and not the deed, one may justly say that we can indeed adopt the liberal idea and apply them in such a way that we free ourselves from chains which we ourselves have slung round our ankles. Bill religion is not devoid of heathenly outlooks, but should they desire to do so, nobody should ever attempt to destroy their own beliefs, not as long at least as the horizon of their happiness remains undisturbed. First, as much as the mysterious events of the creation of the universe merely awakened the desire to marvel at it and to wrap it into a mantle of glory, in the same way religion is approached by the bills, and they are more than satisfied that if in transit values generally attached to things by which we are influenced or surrounded, should not be clarified and codified, as nothing can be gained by it. Clarification creates problems, and each problem can only be solved by creating more, and such a thing is, of course, not the path on which a bill would like to stroll. He is not dominated by religion. It is taken partly as a necessity, partly as the cause and reason of a good number of festivals and holidays, and nobody, not at least a bill, has ever resented a festival. It is undoubtedly not a coincidence that even the tribesman who has never heard of any alike aspirations of other nations made many a start in order to reveal the even greater mysteries of life after death. Nobody has so far succeeded in tearing the veil that conceals the greatest of all mysteries, though it is more than amazing that so primitive a mind came to the same conclusions as did more advanced groups. It is likely that tales, describing the dreadful things that will happen to any wicked person after death, circulated in the earliest times during which group movements and migrations took place. It can, however, not with certainty be denied that the bills possessed great imaginative power, combined with the desire to describe in such a manner the difficulties that await the sinner, that they represent any kind of punishment that could possibly be administered by themselves here on earth, in case they were called upon to do so. Many things are described as wicked, for instance driving cows from a field, a trifle in itself and extremely insignificant in the eyes of those who are not acquainted with life in village and jungle, but, alas, inferno awaits those who drive cows away, where they will be joined by those who are backbiters, cheats, liars or rogues, or by departed souls of men who indulged into the following bad deeds: torturing an innocent animal, deceit, murder, intercourse with the wife of another man, unnatural intercourse or any sexual relations with sister's daughter, aunt or grandmother, etc., infanticide, seducing a woman, theft, putting obstacles into good deeds, showing the house of a butcher, setting fire to houses, destroying corn with the help of mantras, refusing water to the thirsty, insulting the sage or a monk, destroying young plants, disobedience to parents. Not must one be accustomed to rapt. Well, everybody who is found guilty of any one of those offenses will be required to answer for them at the gate of heaven. The road leading to heaven's gate is not an easy one. The disciples of God Yama drag the souls of the departed along a path 10 times sharper than a sword, whilst those who behaved well during lifetime reach paradise with ease and comfort. Many calamities await the wicked sinner's soul. Pits and ditches filled with scorpions, fire, serpents, ants and worms form a perpetual menace, and only those who succeed in getting through this infernal maze ultimately manage to approach God. As in any other religion, punishment awaits the bad. It is a kind of belief that crept into every creed, particularly useful if it is meant to influence the ignorant. It was actually much better if fear was entirely obliterated from religion. There is no such thing like hell and infernal torture. God, who created us, presented us in the same time with the ability to act wrong, and as the wrong takes place during our earthly life and is so closely related to our life, any kind of wrong is punished here on this earth. Many escape punishment, others do not feel it or refuse to realize it. The threats of punishment after death are merely means of checking uncontrolled action and serve to maintain order. The soul, if there is any, has little to do with any deeds dictated by bodily lust or physical cravings, and can therefore not be punished after death. The bill's inclination to take things as easy as possible finds expression in all his way of life. No doubt, they could be happier as they are, and it is rather essential to rid them of certain rude customs which could be achieved by introducing social reforms. Popularizing social reforms faces, however, difficulties due to the remoteness and inaccessibility of the settlements or villages. Besides, People living in remote village are inclined to be obstinate and headstrong so far as their own social customs are concerned, though, here again, the same attitude can be observed in towns, with the only difference that constant contact with strangers is bound to result in a change of the ways of viewing things, and a certain progress to the better usually results in the mitigation of limited and crude aspects that, by tradition, deprive social customs of any elastic adaptability. The villager, and particularly the tribesman who dwells in forest and jungle, usually suffers from some kind of inferiority complex, which stimulates the desire to cultivate friendship exclusively with co-members of his own society, avoiding, so far as possible, contact with the world beyond the limit of the forest outskirts. A ban to the free development of their faculties is created, which, of course, resulted in backwardness. Although the bills are to a large extent themselves responsible for this state of affairs, many circumstances work together, making it impossible to achieve the desired goal, even if a good number of bills had the intention to cast away certain crude customs and adopt those of more advanced clans or groups. Language is one of the chief obstacles, and it should be attempted to introduce at least one common that could be understood by everybody. Only then will it be possible to bring them to the level of other advanced communities. One question arises: who is to be blamed? The tribesman was deliberately made to feel that he is an extremely backward and ignorant creature, and no possibilities and chances were offered to him to rid himself from so wrong an exposition. Provided efforts are made, steps could soon be taken that would lead the bills to cultivate the desire to contact the outer world. Such a chance was so far only very sparsely offered to hill tribes. It was, on the contrary, not even wished that a change of outlook on life overlooked. They prefer to deal with an ignorant clientele from which greater profits can be extracted. Thus, the more shrewd communities can, directly and indirectly, be made responsible for the backwardness of the bills who, not inclined to worry much about it, left things as they are. Lack of ambition and the complete absence of any thirst of power kept the bills in the background or in a kind of perpetual exile. Many traditions, customs, etc., had hereby the change of being preserved, and it is only too natural that they differ widely from those in use by wealthy townsfolk. Town dwellers are, however, not therefore entitled to detest a primitive man. The latter has to a large extent in ancient days taken part in the gradual formation of our present social structure, and it is certainly not the fault of the aboriginal that others managed to outflank him. The more intelligent man will always surpass ignorant, though ignorance has nothing in common with stupidity, and the bills are certainly not stupid. They might be careless and easygoing, but one should take into consideration that a stay in any locality remote from the rest of the world exercises a paralyzing effect. Items that seem so important elsewhere dwindle into insignificance, and instead of acquiring additional faculties, mind and body feels dragged into the claws of animalism. The whole reason of life appears futile, struggle becomes absurd, and resignation invades the mind. It is from this very angle that one had to jungle the aborigines. It is preposterous to expect from them anything with which they simply cannot be acquainted. Anybody, for instance, who derives his livelihood by collecting forest produce, hardly enabling him and his family to exist, will exhibit such a passive attitude. Accustomed to a dreary life, and knowing that the lot of his forefathers did not vary in any way, does not feel induced to effect a change, or, better even, he acquires the conviction that his ways of living are the best possible. In case he shares such an opinion with others, an atmosphere of happiness and contentment can be created and maintained. Not knowing the lure of refinement, he is satisfied with the available and consequently more happy than those who hastily rush from one innovation to the other, not even taking time the possibilities of one of them. Thus, primitiveness of the aborigine is not disqualifying, and primitiveness excuses a certain crudeness that slipped into his daily life, though crudeness may not be looked upon from that angle by the aborigine himself. In his eyes it is merely a lively, but natural manifestation of his own sphere. The introduction of reforms might possibly upset the equilibrium, and instead of imparting benefit, the decreased pressure of handed-down tradition can eventually result in a moral upheaval and uproot whatever was firm so far. It will at least happen in extreme cases. In case now if his fellow brethren object to tribesmen's being coarse and rude, in such a case it is perfectly all right to be crude, because by being crude they merely cater for the expectations of those who do not for one moment expect anything else. The introduction of refinement would only result in creating a ridiculous atmosphere of dandyism, and far away from being understood, the trespasser will only feel uncomfortable and try to fall back on the old standard, or even go beyond it in order to recapture his lost position. Uplift, provided it aims at the amelioration of financial calamities, is always welcome. But every step that attempts to transform a Bill into a student of Shakespeare's works is wrong. The Aboriginals will not benefit by it, and Western civilization will not see any blessing in it. The ability to read and write their own language is much more praiseworthy, and if this is achieved, the Bills can for themselves decide if it is necessary to change their habits. With the view to stress that foreign influence is not always beneficial, a few notes will follow, notes collected in places where Bills are living. Moreover, the contents of these notes are utterances of Bills themselves, and it will be seen that education is not at all looked upon as an asset. Faithfulness, hospitality, strictest adherence to truth, chivalry towards women, respect for civilized person, and for the administrator are virtues of the Bills for generations past. So far as faithfulness and reliability go, no uneducated Bill has so far disappointed. If he is entrusted to take a certain sum to a certain person, he will by all means faithfully carry out the command. The educated Bill, however, cannot be relied upon. He will most certainly spend the entrusted sum somewhere and somehow for himself, and refuge in all sorts of excuses in order to conceal the non-delivery of the money to a third person. In short, faithfulness and reliability disappear as quickly as education advances. From time immemorial, the laws that govern hospitality were irrefutable. If a guest arrives at the house of the poorest man where absolutely no food is available, the host will all the same inquire if his guest wants to share a meal with him, and the offered meal will be available, even if it means borrowing from the neighbors. The educated Bills who pretend that their smaller knowledge rendered them unapproachable and dignified, does not feel inclined to extend hospitality to visitors, at least not if the visitor is uneducated. This change of one of the fundamental virtues of man is, by the Bills themselves, ascribed to the corrupting influence of education. Very little seems to be gained when instruction results in the abandonment of friends and relations, only because of the latter's lack of knowledge of the ABC. In the eyes of the Bill, the speaking of untruth is one of the most despicable crimes. Whatever happened, the Bill will always give a most correct description, even if it is detrimental to himself. Even in case of homicide he has puzzled the courts of law and justice. The uneducated Bill always confesses without restraint, and his strong urge to speak the truth is by no means diminished by the knowledge that punishment may be hard. The slightly polished Bill behaves differently. He uses his insufficient knowledge in such a way that any commitment of his appears distorted in his favor. He hides and conceals the truth with the express aim of sparing himself from punishment. So the Aborigine himself condemns any sort of education, firmly believing that the ability to read and to write undermines tradition and custom, and it is not astonishing that he eyes with disfavor the influences exercised by towns. It is likely that a good number of educated Bills still abstain from violating the laws of their clans, though they cannot escape the sinister impression they create in the eyes of their uneducated brethren by reading books of any kind. The uneducated Bill is always fond of his wife. The wives are not unduly petted, they are well watched by their husbands, and trespassing is certainly not allowed. Should any woman subtly prove to her husband that she is guilty of unfaithfulness, in such a case punishment is dealt out in the form of a good thrashing, or, if it comes to that, he murders his wife straight away. The educated Bill abandoned drastic means of this order, which is laudable, and he prefers to desert his wife. To desert a wife is, however, according to Bill's tradition, an unpardonable act, and Aborigine resents his more learned brethren's inclination to neglect whatever was considered good by his forefathers. In justice to these Bills who still honor tradition despite the limited education that might possibly have turned their minds, one must admit that not everyone misused his contact with school in such a way that he necessarily had to become a scoundrel. The primitive man does not know that knowledge can easily be put to beneficial use, and not knowing what to do with knowledge, he rather prefers to consider only its bad aspects. Knowledge had no room within the framework of his daily routine. Knowledge was never desired. Knowledge was alien and superfluous, and his antagonism is excusable. Besides, very little use can be made of it when living in the jungle. Knowledge, once acquired, may induce a youngster to leave his homestead. He might feel attracted by a more eventful life in town, and the danger exists that he will sever relations with his own family and clan, resulting in an estrangement that can never be bridged again. Nevertheless, he has discovered that it is useful to go to school, as it is a means to ameliorate his financial position. To free himself from the clutches of money lenders is an art which he never understood, though realizing that it can be done. His antagonistic attitude towards school and education may fade away and assist him directly to better his plight. Once he realizes that he benefits by the proper knowledge of prices, he will be able to check shrewd money lenders and thus raise his standard of living, desirable as such, provided he himself does not succumb to corruption or spend his earnings on drink. Aborigines in general and the Bills in particular are often blamed for excessive drinking habits. Freely drinking forms an important item of the diet of nearly every Bill, and nothing on earth exercises a greater lure on him than alcohol. Knowing only too well that the intoxicating effect of liquor is detrimental to his general well-being, an Aborigine may in so far be excused as drink is not always taken for the sake of getting drunk. The Bill's distrust for any kind of modern medicine, the remoteness of his village, and the non-availability of medical aid whenever he is confronted with an emergency, naturally lead him to believe that alcohol possesses the properties of a good medicine, able to cure all kinds of diseases. He fancies that liquor is the best antidote against fatigue, and that any kind of bodily sufferings are bound to vanish as soon as he resorts to the bottle. He is furthermore convinced that alcohol makes the brave even braver, and that he gains strength for doing all kinds of things which he ordinarily would not carry out. In addition, alcohol is said to stimulate the appetite, and as the Bill is rather fond of eating, he does not want to miss a chance and eat moderately for the good reason that he failed to create a hunger-rising condition. Thus many good and wholesome properties are ascribed to alcohol and, besides, many ha-ha days, celebrations and even his religious rituals could never properly be carried out without the flow of liquor. Alcoholic drink is known from the earliest beginnings of civilization. It is logical that any intoxicating liquid became, even in earliest times, highly priced, inasmuch as its very effect could not properly be explained. The desire to be courageous, strong and healthy exists everywhere, and no wonder that Aboriginal tribes cling much to it. Their lives are only maintained by physical labor, and any sign of drinking endurance is taken as an indication of approaching age, increased weakness and consequently a restriction of physical abilities. If such indication can be counteracted by a free intake of alcohol, it may not be surprising that it is actually done. Moreover, the life of primitive men is monotonous enough. Festivals may be frequent, but they do not last forever, and even the merriest ceremony does not decrease or mitigate the necessity to return to the daily routine of hunting or killing. Cinemas and stage plays are unknown in the jungle. There is no distraction of any kind. Alcohol is the only means of escape. It must be admitted that the Bills made, and still make, to frequent and excessive use of this kind of salvation. It constitutes, as a matter of fact, a great danger. Not that alcohol alone will cause untold harm to the physical well-being of the Bills. Hill tribesmen are usually strong enough, and hard work and continuous stay in the open air counterbalances effectively. The curse that accompanies drinking habits finds expression in poverty and a low standard of having. The Bills cannot claim that their standard of living is high in any way. They are indescribably poor. The huts in which they live are of most primitive pattern, devoid of anything that might give rise to the belief that they should like to introduce a change for the better. The intention to do so might exist in their subconsciousness, but being already poor, it is easier to spend the last rupee on liquor than to attempt to purchase an object that might be of some use somehow, which, however, does not prove that one must have it. Even a little drink causes sorrows to vanish. One forgets the moneylender, his threats and vile tactics, and being seen in the liquor shop is the center of information. One meets everybody, and particularly those whose state of mind is quite similar. It is interesting to note that those who acquired some degree of liberty usually abstain from drinking or drink, at least very moderately. The little bit of education which they call their own has at least liberated the sense of consciousness, and very much afraid to lose reputation, the literature Bill became able to exercise control over himself, and his efforts may in the long run influence a wider circle. The foundations exist, and many Bills are quite prepared to become abstinent if they only could. Prohibitions should be introduced, but the question remains open how and when the passionate longing for alcohol will find some other outlet. Every suppression of one craving, be it physical or mental, will help any other suppressed urge to develop and to act as safely valve. It remains to be seen in which way and to what extent the abstinent Bill is going to react, and if he resorts to some other vice as a compensation for the last. On the other hand, one must not forget that alcohol is needed for ceremonial purposes with a centuries-old background. A prohibition would therefore be rather out of place, as it interferes too much with the maintenance of social institution, which forms, after all, the backbone of primitive life. Liquor is needed at the time of sowing, planting and harvesting. Alcohol cannot be dispensed with at marriage ceremonies, and it is as much indispensable whenever death claims a Bill. Alcohol is believed to influence and to appease indirectly the gods, and as nobody thrives well without their blessings, it would be rather difficult for anyone to find a suitable substitute. A substitute could be found, but it may not please the gods, and if anything goes wrong in the village, the tribesman will only fall back with increased vigor and consume more alcohol. He will resort to illicit distillation and take great pleasure in doing so. As nearly every effort has so far failed to convince the average Bill that medicines supplied by dispensaries they are best possible means of curing maladies, he will stick to his own method, and in case he fails to obtain alcohol in the open market, different method has to be employed. Stills will be installed in every house. The Bhagavad or medicine man cannot cure anybody without alcohol. Through him liquor is effaced to the gods, and it is plausible that God's benevolent influences are entirely determined by and dependent on the amount of alcohol offered. Any restriction the free availability of liquor would therefore only result in an enormous upheaval, spreading discontent and dissatisfaction. The money saved through abstinence would be spent on other vices and, besides, the poor life of the aborigine would only become poorer. As long as advanced races do not adhere strictly to prohibition, they are morally not entitled to force others to do what they themselves cannot do. Despite the misuse, the bills should be given the option of deciding themselves what is best for them. Their fondness of drink keeps nevertheless the door open to advance, and it is astonishing why drink is really so dreadful a vice. Steps were not taken centuries age. The bills survived all the same, and may it be said again, they are in no way unhappier than anybody else. Moderation, and not prohibition, are advisable. Whatever has been said here with reference to drink aims only at better understanding. Primitive man has to be judged from a different angle and, more important even, he can only then be condemned when he deliberately acts in such way that his doing so really deserves to be classified as bad. As long as the primitive does not himself have the impression that he acts wrong, well, in such a case, he is right. His ignorance does not disqualify. Finally, we have to take into consideration that aborigines are proved to be very superstitious. The bills form also exception. Drink is linked with superstition, and superstition is one of the foundations of their society. Whoever has lived in hilly tracts where communication is only possible by means of meandering footpaths, may have noticed that hill tribes to either like to live in village-like settlements or in isolated houses dotted over the landscape. Despite their sociable inclinations, the bills abstains from forming any compact settlement. One prefers to live out of the way in some lonely spot. Closely attracted and attached to nature, preference is given to a site where he can live absolutely unhampered by any conventions. Living at a distance from the houses of his brethren appeals in so far to him as close contact with neighbors inapt to lead to friction. The maintenance of peaceful relations is of paramount importance. The aborigine cannot afford to engage in perpetual quarrels that might lead to the destruction of his own happiness or culminate in a clash. Life in the jungle is based on mutual assistance, and as such assistance can only too easily be forfeited, it is decided upon to keep at a respectful distance. Unnecessary gossip, the cause of much trouble, is thus avoided. Everybody concentrates only on those events that happen within his own circle, and the neighbor is thus saved from unpleasant interference. In this respect, town folk have much to learn from the bills. The town dwellers' tendency to flock together and to create a state of congestion is the source of untold friction and inconvenience, though, unfortunately, the concentration of activities in a town necessitates as well a concentration within a certain radius of living space. The bills do not have to face such an evil. Agricultural occupation and the location of fields rather encourage decentralization. This attitude is even carried further. If a bill happens to have 4 sons of marriageable age, he will build for each one of them a hut at a spot distinctly separated from the others. Each son is given a gift in form of cattle, fowls and some primitive implements, and he will henceforth live in his own little world, quite apart from father and brothers. Family ties and personal affection do not suffer herewith. A visit can quickly be paid, and after an exchange of opinions everyone returns to his homely abode. The huts are of a primitive pattern. Bamboo and mud are used as building material, but the huts are constructed in such a way that fresh air is permitted to circulate freely. The latter seldom takes place in a townhouse. The bills attach great importance to fresh air, and it is certainly due to this circumstance that the general state of health is superior to that prevailing in congested areas. The bill's preference to light structures had many good reasons. Very thrifty by nature, the bills likes to change his habitations as often as he can, which could not easily be undertaken in the case of stone buildings. A light hut is easily demolished and easily erected. It does not involve any outlay in form of costly building material. He does not feel prevented to realize a sudden craving for a change of site and climate, and the ease with which his few belongings can be moved remains an inexhaustible source of happiness. Problems do not exist. Contracts must not be cancelled. The new departure means a new life and access to new hunting grounds. It becomes thus evident that primitiveness offers a large margin of freedom, and it is not uncertain that the aborigine is more than wise by clinging to his freedom, even at the cost of being considered a wild man. Despite the fact that the Bills are so jealous of their personal freedom, they never attempted to counteract the Baggots' endeavor to render the Bills slaves of his influence. The medicine man's word counts everywhere. He is the ruler and dictator, and those who disobeyed his instructions were soon taught that such high-handedness has to be punished. The Baggot is the intermediary between the gods and the Bills, and superstitious to the highest degree. No Bill dares to contradict. The Baggot blesses the field, he assists at ceremonies, he helps departed souls on their way to heaven, and, more important even, he is able to detect witches and know how their evil activities can be checked. Of course, the existence of a Baggot is by no means a compliment which one could extend to the Bills. A sorcerer of his caliber is positively an anomaly and a sign of great backwardness. Nobody has already been more attacked than the Baggot. His prestige, however, remains unshaken thanks to his own cleverness. Those who strive to curtail his powers, soon relapse into indifference out of sheer fear that the Baggot may indeed be in constant touch with gods or sinister spirits and heap misfortune on their shoulders. On the other hand, the dead would run the risk of missing heaven, fatal to the dead and fatal to those who survive. It cannot be said that the very existence of a Baggot and the freedom with which he exercises his powers denote that Bills are particularly primitive. The medicine man is an age-old institution, known all over the world, and it is thus not surprising that the Bills rely on him at least as much as others do. Moreover, it is the privilege of the Aborigines to employ Baggots, without whom the tribe could not have developed his characteristic attitude towards life. The Baggots' activities only become objectionable when they are linked with willful exploitation or result in loss of life and prosperity. Loss of life was often enough caused by Baggots who specialize in the detection of witches. Once a woman has been declared a witch, she may by sheer luck escape torture, but many so-called witches were not able to remove the spell from the body of a sick person and unreservedly perished on the instigation of the Baggots. Advanced races have since long discarded witch doctors, substituting them by charlatans of any kind. This may be explained by man's desire to probe the mystical. By not making use of moral remedies, he likes to entrust those who claim supernatural powers, and as everybody hopes to escape from the unavoidable medicine men and their colleagues are permitted to flourish, the Bills are thus not much worse than civilized people. A recent dealing with the manifold changes that came into being in the course of the last 2 decades, special attention was drawn to the Bills who, like many other Aborigines, developed a liking for Western dress. It was stated that coats, long pants and hats are increasingly worn. Being decently attired certainly helps the wearer to look respectable in a way, though it is rather doubtful if the adoption of an alien form of dress is really desirable. In the first instance, it does really not fit into the landscape. The Bill who derives his livelihood from agriculture does not need modern attire. It would only prevent him from moving freely and, besides, to consider himself better than the common lot, will have no beneficial influence on him nor on another. A simple mind becomes easily influenced, and a pair of fashionable trousers is enough to make a man of his kind conceited. Coat and trousers prevent him from doing his regular work, and once he is taken to wearing Western clothes, he will not easily abandon such out-of-the-place habits for fear that the newly acquired dignity will leave him as soon as his babu attire is removed. Personal discomfort counts little or is bravely endured. When combined with a certain degree of literacy, the new habit may easily develop into a profound alienation. Those members of his clan who still wear the regular jungle outfit are forced to feel inferior, whilst the dandy is apt to nourish feelings of superiority. No more able and willing to attend to the work and daily routine of the village, the modern young savage feels attracted by petty jobs in nearby towns and bazaars, provided, of course, that such kind of work still permits him to wear a coat and possibly a tie. The meager education he had regulates naturally his income, and not being able to make the two ends meet, the young dandy has to resort to all kinds of uses, and instead of being a help to his own community, he is led to become a traitor. Grain dealers and merchants might avail themselves of his influence in the villages and induce him to act as a middleman, not with the aim to assist him on his way to success, but with the intention to get a better and more ruthless hold of the villagers. The simple-minded tiller of the soil will with little doubt accept the recommendations of some urbanized member of the clan and blindly believe in his suggestion. In case the Bania desires to purchase a certain produce at a low rate, it is only necessary to send his special envoy to the villagers with the order to spread news beneficial to the dealer, though utterly detrimental to the cultivator. A trifling commission may be paid to the modernized son of the soil, just enough to buy a new coat, which, again, is a further step to the complete break with tradition, customs and manners. It is, of course, not wanted that Aborigines never acquire the habit of dressing themselves properly, though properly means that the national dress privilege in the district should be preferred. A clean dhoti is certainly an aesthetic garment. It is adapted to climatical conditions, comfortable and not too expensive. A national dress fosters in addition national feelings, whilst Western dress can be left to those who is by necessity had to adopt such apparel at a time when their mind and character was already firmly molded. The bills resort at present to a loincloth. A loincloth has many advantages. Cheapness is the most important. Apart from easy availability, it is a most fitting garment for those who have to spend their lives in hospitable forests where physical work and hunt constitute the main sources of income. A loincloth, however, covers the body only to the barest minimum, and despite its efficiency as a work outfit, the loincloth gives the poor man an even poorer appearance, and his chances decrease rapidly whenever he has to come in contact with people who do not look with favor at Aborigines' kind of dress. It is therefore advisable that as primitive tribes increase they should strictly keep aloof from Western styles. Nevertheless, even if Aborigines prefer to wear loincloth only, they have reason to do so. They themselves feel properly attired, and, as long as this conviction is not shaken, it is better to allow every one of them to suit his own convenience. The whole question of dress is, admittedly, merely a matter of tradition and prejudice, and happy are those who do not face the necessity of making all kinds of concessions only for the sake of respectability. After having so much said in favor of the bills, one should turn to the most fundamental order that governs the life of every man. Marriage and marriage customs are of great importance everywhere. Many nations have succeeded in simplifying the matter, others incorporated a tremendous amount of complicating ritual, particularly here's India. Negotiations have to be launched, horoscopes are to be consulted, gods must be invoked, and only little attention is paid to the real aim of marriage. As long as the dowry offered is considered acceptable, the bride necessarily becomes acceptable to the same degree, and it matters relatively little if and how the parties concerned derive any satisfaction and happiness from such arrangements. Bride and bridegroom hardly meet personally before marriage, and whenever they meet refuge is taken to hypocrisy and pretension, by means of which both partners enter the matrimonial bond with wrong ideas about each other. Everybody concerned hopes that things can be settled after marriage, and as things seldom settle as expected, untold unhappiness results. Matters did not become easier with the advance of civilization, and it is worthwhile to inquire how the primitive man tries to tackle the problem. Marriage remains a problem even in backward communities, though less puzzling, as everybody relies on a tradition that leaves little space for complications, and besides, everybody knows what can be expected. The bills, for instance, do not require any young maiden to possess knowledge which cannot profitably be employed. As a good housewife and co-worker, the bill woman exclusively concentrates on tasks connected with such duties. She knows the limit of her capacities, and she is therefore quite free from inhibitions or wrong ideas. Husband and wife know the little world in which they live, and discard from the very beginning any ambitions that might possibly upset the equilibrium of the household. She knows that her husband is fond of alcohol, but nothing prevents her from taking a sip herself, and, so far as the children are concerned, they are at an early age offered the chance of getting acquainted with the taste of liquor, and there is none in the whole family who could possibly condemn the others. Moreover, both partners know well the financial potentialities of their holding, and a bill woman will therefore never abandon herself to longings for objects which cannot in the normal way be acquired. In this respect they differ greatly from their sisters in towns. Town people often fail to abstain from maintaining a sober outlook. The marriage settlement is spiced with vague promises, are permitted to rely on assurance that is seldom realized, which nevertheless instill in their minds the desire to brave for the inaccessible. The bills approach matrimony from a different angle. They know life means hard work, occasionally interrupted by a holiday. However, the human element is not absent. Mutual love brings both partners together, and the alliance convenable comes most seldom into working. No partner is forced on anybody. Of course, the parents still like to arrange a match, but the boy as well as the girl are at liberty to refuse without causing any offense. As a rule, the boy courts the girl, and marriage takes place as soon as they discover that their love is profound enough. Any widow stands a fair chance to marry again. In cases where parents or relatives object, the young man and woman simply run away, and such an act is enough to declare them properly married. In extreme case the jerd has to be kidnapped, and provided the girl is in love, the use of force sanctions the deed, and elopement is followed by recognition. Many girls merely join their lovers by going to houses. This is indication enough that they wish to live together, and the union becomes legally sanctified. Alike everywhere in the world, The bills often decide to run away with the wives of a neighbor. Nobody can prevent a man to elope any married woman with her consent, but the escape is usually followed by a sequel based on clan traditions in order to assure that a certain compensation is paid to the deserted husband. The compensation depends on the age of the runaway wife, the amount which her first husband had to pay to her father at the time of her first marriage, and the preparedness of the first husband to part with his wife. The settling of the zagada requires a lot of bargaining. The whole procedure is to some extent flattering to the unfaithful female. Sums of 1,000 rupees are asked for her release, but usually her value sinks during the bargaining operations, and she discovers that her second husband purchased her for the bare sum of 200 rupees. This, however, is natural course of events, and she still remains recognized as a valuable acquisition. The social status of any woman of her kind remains unaffected. The payment of a compensation legalizes and sanctions, according to the laws of the clan, her transfer from one husband to another. Moreover, the procedure accompanying the action culminates in a feast. The judges, the parting and the newly united parties, some members of their clans and good friends join merrily the troublemakers with the firm intention to forget the past with the help of some liquor. The newly wedded are presented with gifts, and the new departure is made easy by the conviction that everything is all right and in strict accordance with the law and custom of the tribe. Disturbing gossip is hereby eliminated. Any reason to feel guilty or shamed fades away into oblivion, whilst the structure of the tribal society was kept intact. The Zagada system, though condemned by many observers, incorporates one important advantage: a peaceful settlement avoiding bloodshed. To a good number of bills now violence is not acceptable, and refuge is often too drastic measures resulting in loss of life. The unfaithful wife of the seducer runs the risk of being either beaten or murdered in extreme cases. Any union of a man with the wife of another man fails to become sanctioned by the tribe's law in case compensation is refused, and the female degrades herself to the status of a concubine. As the keeping of concubines is, however, an age-old institution, the woman is nevertheless able to enjoy all the animates which her tribe can offer, inasmuch as the bills recognize the necessity of satisfying sexual urges by adoption of any accessible means, and concubines are therefore spared from any humiliating attacks as her functions differ, in principle, little from those of a legally married woman. Prenuptial intercourse is widely spread. The general atmosphere of same contact with nature created no abhorrence for exmarital relations, despite the fact that it is well known that this state of affairs is not desirable as such. Damage is usually prepared by inviting the trespassers in a legalized union, and no blame falls on a child born soon after the marriage ceremony. Illegitimate offspring enjoy the same status as any legitimate child, and prejudices, so often connected with illegitimacy, are either unknown or deliberately ignored. A great number of songs demonstrate even that there is nothing objectionable in having prenuptial intercourse with a girl. Many love songs concentrate on the subject, mentally describing that things could not happen differently, as the girl, waylaid by her lover, simply could not resist his entreaties. Remote and silent valleys, a cluster of trees with undergrowth, or the protected slope of a hill, are pictured as ideal meeting places. The poets of the bills love to see the heroine made pregnant, though matters are mitigated by the birth of a son. Love escapades are, at least in songs, seldom rewarded by the birth of a daughter, whilst a son greatly changes the situation. All goes well if it is a matter of mutual love. Unfortunately, rape is not too uncommon, and it is regrettable that girls underage fall into the category of those who are most easily victimized. The bills themselves consider rape a condemnable crime, and evildoers are without exception handed over to the police, which, in itself, is indication enough that nothing vile or extraordinary is attached to prenuptial intercourse, whilst any attempts to molest a child girl are taken at face value as unpardonable mischief. It is rather typical that the Aborigines' attitude towards any kind of problem appertaining to the question of certain marriage is more healthy and normal than that of civilized individuals. Personal liberty, provided excessive liberty does not result in crime, are the proof around which life rotates, and should personal liberty and real happiness benefit by it, marriage as such could be abolished. Many bills, for instance, have clamored for its destruction, but they have not shown a more excellent way, whilst a greater number defend this immemorial institution. Marriage is believed sacred and indispensable to social order, necessary in the interest of children, but it results too often in failure and, in actual fact, develops often in a hell of torment. Without marriage, humanity would perhaps have to suffer more in accepting marriage as an institution. The primitive egotism of nature's mighty urge has partly to be subdued. The Aborigine, deprived of easy access to the great world, become, by nature, more profoundly and exclusively emotional, and he takes consequently sex matters at once as a concession and a demand, to be shaped accordingly to his own world and outlook. He does not ponder eventual terrifying anxiety or perplexity adapting his life, and that of his female partner, to the same subject which appears to both with approximately equal force, sexual activity, in every from this very angle that we have to judge the primitive man. His edifice, however balanced, offers him the shelter he desires, and it never dawns upon him that he is not enlightened. It is not true that the backwood tribesman is incapable of seeing the difference between sheer impulse and preservation. He always remains within his own sphere. He prefers to be normal, and whatever suits him best is adopted without remorse. Aesthetic values and personal inclinations determine the choice of the partner. The girls must be able to boast of hair as smooth as the skin of a snake. Her walk must be graceful. The forehead must not be flat, so may her nose resemble a flower. Voluminous buttocks, flat feet and big ears disqualify. Desirable. Any young girl with hair on chest and back is declared able to develop lop virtues. White teeth and the absence of gossipy inclinations are as well favorable assets. It is believed that a girl becomes particularly passionate when she indulges into sexual intercourse before reaching puberty. The experience of the jungle further taught that it is wiser to provide as soon as possible a husband for the girl, or, failing to do so, she turns mad with desire. In such a state it is difficult to pacify her passion. She might even become a menace to the village and compel the very next male to devote attention to her, or she dies of madness. It becomes apparent that the Bills do not believe in restraint, and it can really not be said that animal passion plays an important part in his life. The desolate and isolated region in which they live, and the close contact with the nature around merely fosters a straightforward attitude. Erotic pleasures are the only available distraction. After the day's toil fires are lit, men and women of every age and description assemble, in order to start with the popular nocturnal dance round the fire, enlivened by obscene songs, movements and gesture, every one of which exclusively represents an erotic provocation. Demonstrations of this kind, surpassing the borderline of decency, find, thanks to the vulgar note, an echo in the primitive soul, sweeping inhibitions away and resulting in an alarmingly high degree of debauchery. The effect of the flickering flames of the fire combines lewdness of exciting songs, is traditionally accompanied by liquor, and it is really not surprising that such lusty assemblies culminate in events which, with some restraint, could have been avoided. Everyone is caught by the desire to kidnap, to elope or to rape. Thought not too much attention is paid to it. Their inability to stem the natural course of events is recognized and well known, and, everybody admits, the provocation was planned by organized mass action which, in its turn, naturally has to result in mass debauchery. It is of course regretted by many Bills that established family ties can so easily be loosened as a result of their dancing parties, but nothing is done that might possibly eradicate the evil. The practice as such teaches very little that could be accepted by more advanced groups, and it must be kept in mind that it is the main aim of this treating to illustrate that mankind derives only to a certain extent benefit from convention. On the one hand, ample proof extent that lack of strangling conventions exercise a loosening effect on the moral attitude of clans or even whole nations. It is often said primitive tribes can only advance after being acquainted with certain fixed moral standards. There is little doubt that much could not done in that direction, but it still remains to be questioned if the introduction of moral standards so far alien to the primitive man really results in an increase of personal happiness. The latter counts so much in our life, is so easily jeopardized and so difficult to regain. In the case of the Bills, it can be said that only few members really desire a change. The majority is firmly convinced that a change is not at all necessary, and it is therefore very doubtful if the Bills will ever feel more contented after being more or less forced to adopt standards that might mean much to others, offering, however, little to themselves. The subject has to be handled with great delicacy, and primitive man who has the impression that his customs are threatened is prone to adopt an antagonistic attitude which induces him, for the sake of the maintenance of his personal habits and inclinations, to retire to more remote corners of his jungle kingdom where an unhampered indulgence into old established tribal life can be carried out. Uplift work has been carried out and attempts are being made to teach reading and writing. A man who knows to read well might be an ornament to the village, and his ability to interpret the news of the daily papers might possibly stimulate others to follow his example. Literacy means as well that the obscure accounts of money lenders can easier be checked, which, in return, lead to increased prosperity of the village population. Such an advantage is required by the Bills, but little could so far be achieved in the field of tribal custom. The easy way of living remains the foundation of the village society, and, Should it be possible to pay less to the creditor, the savings are by preference used to cover expenses pertaining boastfully staged celebrations which, in conformity with the degree of opulence, result and are desired to result in a fall. An absolutely unrestricted outburst of gaiety crowned by a general relaxation of any moral barriers, a battlement spiced with erotic provocation, constitutes the climax of the primitive man's life. Even the literature is unable to resist non-participation would earn him the reputation of being either conceited or even important, and as nobody likes to see these attributes connected with his name, barriers are bound to fall easily. The great tenacity with which the Bills stick to established institutions is demonstrated by his reluctance to ease believing in witchcraft. The community is ruled by the witch doctor who, thanks to his good relations with gods and demons, is considered the only being who can avoid disaster. The witch doctor's efficiency depends, naturally, on the remuneration offered to him, though a goat or some fowl are considered not too shabby a payment. Alcohol increases the bagot's power to summon the invisible rulers of this world. In extreme cases he feels a light to detect the source of any calamity and, in common with many witch doctors acting all over the world, mystic curtains draw him to the witch. Witches are supposed to maintain mischievous intercourse with demons and the devil in particular, though she can save her good name by admitting that she is the witch who caused illness in the neighbor's house. The witch, after many entreaties, forcibly agrees to drive the ghastly spell away by performances near the bed of the affected, sick person. She might become a great celebrity in the districts provided, of course, that the spell is removed and the neighbor's health is restored. Failure to do so has torture and death in its trail, exposed to unsurpassable brutality. The witch life is slowly but painfully extinguished, whilst glamour, fame, presents are kept in store for those more fortunate witches who, helped by nature, luckily escaped from a rather unpleasant treatment. The very fact that the authorities had to take the most severe steps in order to impress he Bills that belief in witches is more than vain, proves that it is not easy to interfere with tribal custom. The torture of witches is now prohibited, nevertheless every bill will probably never cease to do so. The witch doctor's powers remain unrestricted, his medicines obtainable at government dispensaries, and it is quite likely that witches are still tortured and killed without the knowledge of the authorities. Government's decision was certainly right on humanitarian reasons. In new order, in the first instance they hold on to the conviction that witches exist, and, secondly, by not being able to accuse a witch, the latter cannot be induced to cure a sick person or animal, and death is bound to result. Moreover, the very knowledge that is legally not possible exterminable witches by torture, resulted in the apprehension that many more women might feel inclined to overcome surplus and to become witches instead. As witches are now protected by law, witchdom is made easy and attractive, and the Bills feel that they run the grave risk of being overpowered by many-fold sinister influences. Nobody can understand why it suddenly became necessary to break with tradition. Whilst a number of women is spared from unjust attack, the whole tribe undergoes pangs of fear, and the innovation is far away from being applauded. Thus the new law, imported from the civilized world, failed to contribute to the personal happiness of the Bills, and I am afraid the influence of the civilized world will become more and more persistent in the course of time, and it is worthwhile to watch the effects. Superstition is framework of daily tasks. Apart from agriculture, hunting is one of the major occupations. Not only that hunting appeals to man in general, it is one of the sources from which his livelihood is derived. A successful hunt provides meal for the whole family, and it is logical that many precautions must be taken in order to ensure success. A favorable moment has to be awaited for the start. The early morning hours and late in the evening are considered particularly favorable, inasmuch as the risk of meeting people on the road is largely diminished at such a moment. By no means must the hunter betray that he intends to kill game, and nothing is more harmful than a question posed to him during his wanderings through the forest. Any question means bad luck, though he can remove the evil effects by throwing a stone in the direction of the questioner. It is, however, much wiser to resort to more thorough methods, and the spell case on his weapon is nullified by winding small branches of a wild plum tree around his hunting paraphernalia. The bow is then placed under some stones over which the hunter has to step. This procedure, when carried out with care and concentration, pacifies the demons. Great silence must reign, and nothing is more unfortunate than the noise produced by the ears when a dog violently shakes his head, worse even if a deer manages to escape. The sight of a fox makes it clear to the shikaree that it is futile to continue in his search for game. Matters are quite different in case the hunters happen to meet a pregnant woman. As a matter of fact, the hunter cannot ask for a more auspicious omen, particularly if the woman carries a jar filled with water on her head. Ticker and lorry birds have the power to impart success to hunter's enterprise. but everything is bound to go wrong after the crowing of the pangale bird could be heard from a distance. In desperate case the blessings of the witch doctor are sought who, in exchange of appropriate remuneration, gently summons the gods of the forest. The observation of all these precautions is hardly necessary on the day following the 14th of January. It is the proverbial lucky day for every hunter in one way unpunished indulge into a slightly indifferent attitude towards the otherwise golden rules for hunt, cultural identity. It would be a matter of great difficulty to teach the bills that phenomena as described have little to do with success or failure of a hunt. Of course the escape of a samhur is an exasperating experience, and every hunter will describe the event as unfortunate. In the eyes of the primitive man happenings of this kind become unlucky, and once disappointed and nervous due to failure, the hunter's steadiness and keenness is easily affected and more failures are consequently not excluded. The desire not to be questioned when out setting for a hunt is explicable. The hunter feels inclined to boast that he intends to shoot so many pieces of game, whilst it might easily happen that he shoots nothing at all. His reputation as a hunter is thus exposed to criticism and ridicule, and he prefers not to be questioned in advance. There is always time and opportunity enough to boast after the samhur has been killed. Light-hunted, swift and active and fond of excitement, the bills possess good qualities as hunters, killing with arrow and bow every kind of creature that can possibly be killed without the use of fire weapons. Steady work is loathed. It seems much more profitable to roam about, to collect some honey, grass or fuel to supplement eventual meager results of the shikar. At particularly critical moments help is offered to bigger landlords, and the few unescaped are enough to carry on for the moment. The daily diet consists of milk, bread, curds, vegetables, fish and occasionally a mouthful of flesh. All these items are produced either by themselves or their little holdings, or the forest supplies whatever may be lacking. Roots and fruits grow profusely throughout the jungle. The sacrificial slaughter of buffaloes is the crowning event of the year. On such an occasion large quantities of meat are eaten. The Bill does in principle not object to eating the flesh of cows, and his want of reverence for the life of these animals placed him rather low among Hindus. Though touch does not defile, several tribes abstain from eating beef, but all of them believe in demoniacal influences, witchcraft and omens. Their religion is one of fear, and it is therefore quite natural that their whole pattern of life was and is in consequence shaped by fear and superstition. Orgies, feasts and bacchanals are the natural means of escape. A prayer uttered on one of the consecrated stones offers mental calm and satisfaction to those who do not participate in worldly orgies. A few reverence holy trees or believe in the assistance of an enchanted horse or dog. Nature provided a fitting setting for this extraordinary kind of life. The luxuriant jungle with her evergreen coat of foliage, undulating and rising to lofty heights, forms indeed the most suitable background in which the cultural life of the Bills could develop. Rustling trees, the calm of dale, the gentle roar of a waterfall, and the manifold strange voices of the forest exercise an eloquent appeal pleasing to the casual traveler, but immensely laden with significance and meaning to the primitive son of the forest. The gourd tree, growing in solitude on the summit of a mound, literally invites the presumption that the huge stem ever served as an abode of some powerful spirit, whilst the slight animation of the foliage, stirred by the evening breeze, logically indicates pleasure or displeasure of the demon. And is it not natural that gods prefer to dwell near running water, ever ready to listen to the playful sound of the waves? Strange meanings are attributed to strangely shaped shrubs which, when covered with blossoms, exercise alluring influences. Or what shall the Bill think of the solitary giant boulder found on slope? They are manifestations of an almighty power, beyond reach, and worthy to be worshipped. Why should the strange cry of a bird not be taken as an indication of warning to abstain from approaching a silent valley where apparently, witches confer with the devil and his helpmates? Not listening to the warning spells disaster, but where lie the boundary within which the devil agitates sinister forces? The witch doctor, the only man able to extract the proper meaning from strange phenomena, has, by necessity, to be consulted, and nothing would be more dangerous and provocative than not to sacrifice a goat on a certain day. Town officials, sent from far away to the judge wilderness, have good talking, though what do they actually know? Not initiated will be secrets and love of the forest. They represent, from the point of view of the primitive man, a heretical menace. The jungle dweller does not want to get acquainted with civilization alien to his beliefs. He might appreciate his son's ability to write and to read and to settle his accounts with the Bania, but this is all what is actually wanted. This very life, established in its present form and shape for thousands of years, seems to him so utterly perfect and regular, and what does poverty matter to him? Of course, an increase of his income does not meet with any objection, but money is easily spent. The whole matter would interest the primitive man provided it is possible to ascertain that his gods, demons and spirits fall into line and adapt themselves to the new situation. Is there any guarantee that witches are going to lose the power to trouble the village, or will they at least become more docile and less aggressive? Who can prove that the witch doctor is wrong? Hardly anybody is so far willing to believe in the curative properties of modern drugs available at the dispensary. The recovery of a sick person is still ascribed to the good influences of gods who, despite the intake of outlandish medicines, benevolently pardon those who temporarily lost faith. In the case of death, blame is thrown on medicines obtained from outside and the baggott's position is only strengthened. The bills cling to tradition as much as more advanced communities do, and it would indeed be a great mistake to pronounce a verdict in their disfavor. No doubt, they are very backward, but in many instances the backwardness itself contributed to their well-being and happiness to such an extent that one feels really inclined to ponder over the merits of this kind of life, natural in acting and thinking, straightforward in expression. The bills possess perhaps the key to happiness. Anything that makes life complicated is avoided and ambitions do not exist. Everybody follows the one and only path to personal happiness and satisfaction. The means of reaching the goal may be crude, though they are crude only in the eyes of those who want to reform. On the other hand, nobody outside any one of the tribe can be forced to adopt anything that is acceptable to the bills only. But we should not fail to appreciate that the primitive culture of the bills is extremely rich, though not acceptable to the civilized world. The whole structure of civilized life would collapse if any one of those institutions preferred by the bills were introduced. The upheaval would attain dimensions of unforeseen magnitude, without speaking of the many obstacles that have to be overcome. From a certain point of view, it is regrettable that civilized groups are already to such an extent entangled in strangling conventions that personal liberty and happiness became more and more unknown. If it would be possible to change our attitude without causing lasting harm, one should try to do so. Abstain, however, from importing new ideas from utopia and fall instead back on the flow of energy still circulating in districts which we are pleased to describe as backward. The bills are foolish in many ways and they do not deserve to be imitated, but as they are positively happier than any civilized person, one should not entirely discard the possibility to make use of the few good ideas which they can offer and correct. At the same time, the mischief that the bills are just one of those wild tribes whose name alone ought to be taboo. Official literature has little sympathy for the bills. They are described as lazy, ignorant cattle lifters and robbers, concentrating occasionally on agriculture out of the sheer necessity to fill their stomachs. Every society is well supplied with a good number of rowdies, but this does not indicate that everyone is a gangster. Many bills are most charming people, hospitable, sincere and ready to please, and it is utterly regrettable that they are prepared to resist the claims of money lenders and grain dealers who discovered that the bills are an easy prey. Incapable to appreciate material profits, they fostered themselves the belief that the every bill is endowed with a great deal of stupidity which, as a matter of fact, is not the case. Simple and inoffensive in their outlook, they are inclined to take everything for granted, only in order not to disturb the peace of their lives. It is not exactly known how many bills actually live in the various parts of India. An accurate census is in so far made difficult as the name bill is often given to wild or half-wild tribes. The hilly tracts of the Bombay Presidency are considered to be the original home, from which many clans spread in all directions, even as far as the plains of Gujarat and the northern Deccan. Bills can even be met in Rajputana and Sindh. The migration to the latter districts, so contrary in climate to the original home, is probably based on necessity. Famine and an increase of difficulties drove the dweller of the forests into the scorched plains of northern India where land was available. It is generally presumed that bills occupied once an honorable position. Some of their kings ruled over wide countries and exercised great power, but opposed to the advancing tide of Aryan conquest in primitive times, the opposing bills were unable to stem the invaders who gradually succeeded to push the bills back to the fastnesses of mountains and forests which they eventually occupied. As a race they were feared and hated, and it is not surprising that the contemporary chronicler felt great reluctance to mention the bills in his scripts where the history of a fierce uncivilized, conquered or fallen race was not considered a subject sufficiently attractive to adorn the annals of more advanced races. Only on few occasions are they contemptuously spoken of as an illegitimate people. The bills, however, were not too much pleased by this kind of treatment and retaliated by invasions of the plain country, re-establishing their contact with dominant races Rajputs, though their strongholds it is said could mostly be found only among the bills and in the forests where greater security and better means of defense were offered by nature. Some of the neighboring races finally overcame their reluctance and prejudices and intermarried with the Bills, though this admixture of races was never considered particularly recommendable, inasmuch as the proud Rajput families carefully tried to avoid the introduction of any foreign element, whilst the Bills showed a certain anxiety to prove that Rajput blood is, at least partly, circulating in their veins. Moreover, the Rajput's attitude is excusable. The very fact that an admixture of fair-colored races with member of less fortunate dark races usually results in particularly dark offspring, proves that some kind of a color bar existed already in ancient times. Those Bills who had intermarried with Rajputs etc., developed, in their turn, a high degree of snobbishness which led finally to a distinctions among the Bills. New classes, clans, tribes and sub-tribes sprang into existence, forming the nucleus of the present order. No wonder that the Bills differ, in their outer appearance, so much from each other. Small, light-limbed, fair and active men form a contrast with stunted wild woodmen with African features who are again classified worlds apart from the well-made, tall and handsome members of certain tribes. It is however, typical that the same kind of dress is in favor with all the various tribes. The loincloth is universal, a bracelet, necklace and a pair of earrings are the ornaments worn, though gold is seldom represented. The Bills are too poor to afford costly ornaments. Silver and brass became fashionable. Strings of glass and stone beads were liked since time immemorial and are still in great favor today. A few glass bangles, cheap but colorful, are a sign of enviable prosperity. The village belle wears sometimes a nose ring, though this type of ornament is classified as extreme luxury and denotes a high degree of extravagance. The turban is an indispensable requisite of every man. The women favor embroidered bodies, completed by a never too clean a sari. The dialects spoken are innumerable. Every village has its own dialect. Every hamlet boasts of some kind of a slang not understood in places some miles away. Occasionally one comes across some strange form of speech which seems to point to an original language now lost. The Bills never developed a written language of their own. If anything has to be recorded, refuge is taken to a script resembling Gujarati, Marathi or Hindi, according to the fluctuating nature of the dialects spoken in the very district. Little is known about the exact number of tribes and clans. The Bills are almost, in conformity with Hindu custom, very fond of dividing themselves in innumerable clans and groups, though the differentiation does not equal the proper Hindu caste system. It is difficult to explain why the Bills took to so great fondness of dividing every group into countless subgroups. The historians, at least, mention that such a system was not known among the Bills of ancient days. A strain of foreign blood, miscellaneous origin, the father's name, a favorite settlement or occupation, private pursuits and membership of tokenistic organizations support the view that many reasons existed and inspired the early Bills to separate and differentiate. Those who eat beef have, naturally, to form a different group. The tribes concentrating on hunting keep aloof from cultivators, whilst customary differences in worship, dress, the habits of eating or preparing food, alone are inducement enough to create certain distinctions. Rituals, ceremonies and festivals are an additional cause. The pure and impure cannot mix on such occasions. Untouchability, however, is hardly known. Members of the many-fold clans interdine, but certain restrictions are imposed on intermarriage. During the long centuries of decline, the spirit of the Bills was only partly broken. Poverty, laziness and the loss of power of resistance have hastened the downfall. Original tribal life, however, remains strong. The Bills are not degenerate, nor do they foster misanthropic inclinations, and it is quite possible that customs may undergo a revival which, when to some extent modernized, able to contribute to the uplift of the whole community. Folklore and folk songs. Folk songs, another expression of tribal culture, vividly portray the mental outlook. So far as the songs of the Bills are concerned, dance, pleasure, love-making and sexual indulgence usually form the background. Events of domestic importance and, occasionally, the life stories of national heroes lend themselves to romantic interpretations. Whatever may be described in songs, the Bills never venture outside their own sphere of living. The forest, the dense jungle, some tree or a colorful flower are chosen as the scene or the object of their song, by which means the strong preference to their own national locality is stressed. A few extracts may serve as an indication and illustration. The root of an old Karanji tree contains a well-like cavity in which a fir tree was planted, probably by a god. The young fir tree benefited by the abundance of water and grew therefore well, swinging, in the breeze, from left to right just in the same fashion as a king sways gently when sitting on his throne. One day, it happened that a girl directed her steps towards the young tree. The girl stood in its shade, lovingly admiring the forest, when a boy approached her quite suddenly, giving sway to his passions. He caught the hands of the girl and whirling her round, caused her to fall on the grassy ground. Naturally, the youngster committed a sexual indiscretion and the girl became pregnant and, when time was ripe, a little boy was born. In the fashion of her tribe, the young mother tied a swing to the branch of a tree, keeping it moving all the time, to the delight of her child. The song does not explain whether or not the two arranged for a marriage, though it might be presumed that the birth of a son is compensation enough, apart from the pleasure derived from her pleasant occupation, which consisted in keeping the swing in swaying motion too. A big Kirani tree, laden with fruit, grew on the slopes of some distant hill. The fruits of the Kirani tree are sweet to eat and the young folk love to go, in groups or alone, to the sloping hill in order to gather the fruit. So, it happened that a girl, named Yumi, went to the tree with the intention to eat some fruits. Whilst she was busy doing so, she noticed that she had been followed by a boy who, after having reached the spot where the girl was standing, made it clearly understood that he was not exclusively interested in the sweetness of the fruits. He caught the girl and raped her without remorse. In this song it is stated that the consent of the girl was probably not obtained. The very fact that young men are in the habit of watching the movements of girls who stride alone through the forest ought to be known to the daring beauty, and it is left to the audience to decide if the girl knew all about it or if she deliberately went alone into the forest with the hope of being seen by a male.
For they had already had an
Undecided as it
opportunity
is,
of doing
a
this when
poignant
he
note is
invaded the
introduced
country
into the
during their
song,
government,
exercising
that
a
all the
strong appeal to
5,000
the
would with their
wills,
proper
who are
share in
only
the
too
government,
prone to act
and
in
that
the
their
same way
hero's
as the
relatives had
youngster
neither
did.
outrage,
Though no son is
as
born
Cherry said
afterwards, and the
slanderously
girl's
reported,
reputation is
nor
saved by
other
saying that
ill-treatment to
rape had
complain
taken
of,
place
but
and
were all
nobody
in
can blame her
undisturbed
for it.
enjoyment of their
Bitter
property
complaints
just as
are
they
launched
had
by a
left them.
youngster who strives in vain to
Besides
gain
these, they made
favors
a
from a
number
girl
of other
named Nangi.
statements which
All
had no
his
better
entreaties
success
proved
with
to
their
be
angry
futile.
auditors,
The girl
and
makes
amid
it
a
clear
host
that
of
she is
different
unable to
opinions, the
nourish
one
feelings
which
of
found most
affection
favor
for
was
him,
that of
driven
sailing
to
to
utter
Piraeus.
despair. The
Now
boy
it was that
acquires a threatening
Alcibiades for the
attitude
first
by
time
asking
gave
the
a
girl
state of
how it is
service,
possible for
and
her
one
to
of the most
smile at a
signal
certain boy
kind.
Ranja,
For when
and
the
even to have
Athenians at
sexual
Samos were
intercourse
bent
with
upon
him,
sailing
whilst
against
he,
their
the unhappy
countrymen,
suitor,
in which
has
case
to remain
Ionia and the
unsatisfied and
Hellespont would most
disappointed.
certainly at once have passed
On the
into
one
possession of
side,
the
the
enemy,
girl's steadfastness
Alcibiades
is
it was who
stressed,
prevented them.
but, as nobody
At
sees
that
anything
moment, when
praiseworthy
no
in
other
it,
man
the
would have
girl
been able to
becomes the
hold back the
fascinating
multitude,
centerpiece of the
he put
song
a
by the
stop to the
admission of
intended
certain relations
expedition,
with
and
Ranja,
rebuked
her
and
real
turned
lover.
aside the
The
resentment
disappointed
felt,
suitor
on
might be a
personal
well-to-do
grounds,
man, though
against
this
the
is not
envoys.
enough
He
inducement to the
dismissed them
girl
with an
who,
answer
like
from
every
himself,
Bills,
to
male
the
or
effect
female,
that he did not
listens
object to the
exclusively to
government
the
of the
voice of the heart
5,000,
and, by
but
breaking
insisted
down
that
all
the 400
barriers,
should be
goes
deposed
even
in
so
the
far that her
council of
connections,
500
not
reinstated in
legalized by
power.
marriage, with
Meanwhile,
her
any
lover are permitted to
retrenchments
be
for
known to
economy,
everybody.
by which
She
pay might be
acquires the
better found
reputation
for
of
the
being
armament,
natural and
met with his
desirable,
entire
whilst the
approval.
lover may boast of
Generally,
hours
he
intimate
bade them
bliss.
hold out
The
and
events
show a
described
bold face
firmly
to the
express the
enemy,
Bill's
since
attitude
if
in
the city
matters of
were saved
sex.
there was
One
good hope
cares
that
little
the
in
two
particular,
parties
and
might
even if it
someday
comes
be
to an open
reconciled,
scandal, matters
whereas
can
if
always
either were
easily be
once
arranged.
destroyed, that at Samos, or
Complications
that
are
at
only
Athens,
created by
there
those who
would no
cannot
longer
do
be
without it,
anyone
and,
to be
decidedly,
reconciled to.
the Bills do not
Meanwhile
belong to
arrived
this
envoys from the
category.
Argives,
4. A
with
farmer
offers
who
of
had spent
support to
many
the
hours
Athenian
plowing his
commons at
fields,
Samos.
neglected
These
in
were
his
thanked by
tiredness to watch
Alcibiades,
the
and
girl
dismissed
Chungi
with
who
a
had
request to
accompanied
come
him to
when
the
called
fields.
upon.
No wonder that the girl was
The
glad when
Argives
she
were
was approached
accompanied
by
by the
one of her
crew of the
boyfriends.
Perilous,
She did
whom
not
we left
hesitate to
placed in a
accept his
troop ship by the
invitation to
400
follow
with
him into the
orders to
forest,
cruise
and
round
once
Euboea,
hidden from
and who
sight,
being
she
employed to
became an
carry the
easy
Lacedaemon
prey.
and some Athenian envoys
The
sent by the
escapade,
400,
however, became known
Lyspodius,
through her becoming
Aristophane,
pregnant,
and
though the god
Milesius,
smiled
as
at
they
her and
sailed by
presented her
Argos,
with a
laid
son.
hands
The
upon the
little lad was one
envoys,
of the
and
prettiest
delivering
babies
them
ever
over to the
born, and
Argives
never
as the
before
chief
had a
subverters
mother
of
with
the
greater
democracy,
tenderness kept the boy's
themselves,
swing in
instead
motion.
of returning to
The farmer
Athens,
is to be
took the
blamed for the
Argive
accident.
envoys on
He should
board,
not have
and
taken his
came to
daughter to the
Samos in the
field,
galley
or,
which had
if
been
he had,
confided
at
to
least
them,
employed
the
her
same summer
properly,
at the
things
time that
might
the
have taken
return
a
of
different turn.
Alcibiades coupled
But,
with the general
apparently,
conduct of
she knew the boy
Tissaphernes
better
had
than
carried
anyone
to
else,
its
and
height
his
the
coming was
discontent of the
perhaps prearranged.
Peloponnesians, who no longer
Again, we
entertained
see
any
that
doubt of his
youngsters,
having
who
joined the
intend to make
Athenians,
mischief, often
Tissaphernes
have to
wishing,
hoodwink
it would
their elders
seem,
who,
to clear
it seems,
himself to
are
them of
quite
these
accustomed
charges,
to it. 5.
prepared to go
All
after
kinds
the
of fine
Phoenician fleet
vegetables
to
are planted in the
Aspendus,
garden,
and
and the
invited
gardener
Richness to
can
go
think
with
of
him,
nothing better than
saying
to
that he
present
would
his
appoint
sweetheart
Tamas
with a
as his
basket full
lieutenant
of
to provide
greens.
pay for
The
the
theme of this
armament
song
during
is
his own
strikingly simple and
absence.
decent. A
Accounts
gardener,
differ, and it is
skillful
not
in
easy
his
to
art,
ascertain
can
with
boast
what
of a crop
intention
of
he
fine
went to
vegetables, and
Aspendus,
one can
and did
assume
not
that
bring the
his
fleet
ability
after
to
all.
raise such good vegetables is
That
known to a good number of
147
girls. Is it not
Phoenician
very
ships came
likely
as
that a
far as
particularly
this is
fair maiden
certain,
rather
but why
likes to
Tate did
pass
not
along
come
the
on has
garden's
been
fence when
variously
on
accounted
her way to the
for.
village
Some
well?
think that he went away in
She might
pursuance of his
hesitatingly
plan
have
of
slowed
wasting
down
the
the pace of her
Peloponnesian
steps,
resources,
glancing
since
timidly
at
over
any
the
rate
fence or,
Damis, his
better, even,
lieutenant,
have
far
made
from being
encouraging
any
remarks
better,
as to the
proved a worse
quality of the
paymaster
crop
than
grown
himself.
and the
Others
abilities
said
of the
he
young
brought the
gardener in
Phoenicians to
particular.
expend
Is
to
it so
exact
difficult
money
for
from
him
them
to
for their
understand that the
discharge,
maiden merely
having never
pretended to be
intended to
interested
employ
in his
them.
vegetables?
Others again that it
Well,
was in
to
view
make
of the
sure,
outcry
he
against
sends
him
her
at
a basketful,
Lacedaemon, in
guessing
order
that this
that it might
friendly
be said that
gesture
he
is
was not
bound
in
to clarify
fault,
the
but that the
situation.
ships were really manned
Certainly,
and that he
she
had
must be
certainly
pretty
gone
too
to fetch them.
quite
To
desirable and
myself it seems
attractive, or
only
he
too
would not
evident
have
that he did
bartered with
not
his
bring up the fleet
vegetables at
because
all.
he wished to wear out and
6. A
paralyze the
boy and a
Hellenic
girl happened to
forces,
be alone
that
in the
is,
house.
to waste
This
their
very
strength by the
favorable
time lost
circumstance
during
makes
his
the
journey
boy
to
rather bold,
Aspendus,
and it is
and
not
to keep them
surprising that the
evenly
girl
balanced by
feels
not
rather
throwing his
afraid,
weight
though the
into either
passionate
scale.
feelings of the boy are not
Had he
subdued
wished
by
to
her
finish the
fearful
war,
attitude.
he
On
could
the
have done so,
contrary, he
assuming
forces
of
the
course
girl
that he
to
made his
quieten his
appearance in a
emotions
way
in the
which
most
left no
drastic
room for
manner.
doubt,
In the
as
heat
by
of the
bringing up
act,
the
it
fleet
was
he would
not
in all
noticed that a neighbor
probability
was
have
watching
given
the
the
struggle
victory
through
to the
half open window.
Lacedaemonians,
This
whose
remark
navy, even
terrified the
as it
boy and the
was,
girl.
faced
They
the
tried to
Athenian
solve
more
the
than
riddle by
equal than as
asking
an
each other what is
inferior.
going to
But what
happen, in
convicts me
case the
most
neighbor
clearly
spreads the
is the
story of what he
excuse
has
which he
been.
put forward for not
So
bringing the
far as
ships.
this song is
He said that
concerned,
the number
the Bills
assembled
cannot
was
claim
less
to
than
have
the king had
introduced a new
ordered, but
subject.
surely
As
it would
long as
only
the
have
earth
enhanced his
rotates,
credit
there
if
will
he
always
spent
be
little
some
of the
couples
king's
who have
money
to
and
torture
effected
their
the
mind
same
by
end at less
asking, what
cost.
is going to happen now?
In any
7.
case,
This
whatever
song,
was his
taken from
intention,
another group of
Tissaphernes
songs,
went to
has as its
Aspendus and
theme
saw
the
the
complaint of a
Phoenicians,
woman who
and the
feels neglected
Peloponnesians at
by
his
her
desire
husband.
sent to Lacedaemonium
Although the
called
Bills do
Philip
not
with 2
attach too
galleys to
much
fetch the
importance to
fleet.
little complaints of this
Alcibiades finding
kind,
that
jealousy
Tissaphernes
is at
had gone
least
to
permitted to
Aspendus,
figure more
himself sailed
prominently in their
thither with
songs.
13
I am as
ships,
beautiful as the
promising to do
flower of
great
the
and
mango
certain
tree.
service to
My
the
eyes are
Athenians
radiant
at
like a cotton
Samos,
flower
as
that
he would
sways
either
in the
bring the
morning
Phoenician
breeze.
fleet
My
to the
body is more
Athenians,
beautiful
or at
even than
all
the
events
leaves of the
prevent
neem
it
tree.
joining the
So fresh,
Peloponnesians.
so
In
clean,
all
and so
probability he had
unsurpassably
long known that
delightful. But
Tissaphernes never
alas,
meant to
my
bring the fleet
husband
at
fails to
all,
see that
and
I am
wished to
so attractive
compromise him
and,
as much
worse
as
even,
possible
he
in the
devotes
eyes of
all
the
his attention
Peloponnesians
to
through
another
his
woman,
apparent
one who
friendship
really
for
cannot
himself
claim
and
to
the
be as
Athenians,
beautiful as I
and
am.
thus in a manner to oblige
How
him
do
to
I know
join
what
their
my
side.
husband thinks of her? He
While
behaves like a white
Alcibiades weighed
crane and
anchor and
takes even
sailed
to using
eastward
bad
straight for
language.
Phaselis
It is
and
certainly not
Caunus, the
possible that
envoys
he has
sent by the
already
400
forgotten
to
that I am
Samos
of good
arrived
stock.
at
Nothing will
Athens,
ever
upon
change
their
his mind,
delivering
and
the
it is
message
really
from
better for me to
Alcibiades,
die.
telling them to hold
The
out and
fate
to
of a
show a
neglected
firm
beauty
front
is
to the
quite
enemy,
contrary
and
to
saying
general
that he had
practice.
great hopes of
Certainly, a
reconciling
good
them
many
with the
Bills
army and
neglect
of
their wives,
overcoming the
but as soon as a wife
Peloponnesians.
has the
The
impression
majority
that
of the
her
members
husband's
of the
attention is
oligarchy,
diverted
who
in
were
another
already
direction,
discontented
she
and
will
only too
positively
much
refuse
inclined
to
to be
pass
quit of the
through all the
business in any
stages of
safe way that
martyrdom
they
and
could,
simply
were at
make
once
arrangements
greatly
with somebody
strengthened in their
else. A
resolve.
second
These now
husband is
banded
soon
together
found,
and
and as
strongly
the first
criticized
husband
the
is the only one to
administration,
be
their
blamed for the
leaders being
breakdown
some
of
of the
one's happy
principal generals and
matrimonial
men in office
relations,
under
the
the
second husband
oligarchy,
benefits
such as
insofar as his
Semiramis, son of
finances will be
Hagan,
less taxed. In
Aristocrates,
such a
son of
case, as
Sellius,
said
and
before, the
others,
Bills
who,
delight in
although
portraying
among the
their
most
lives in their
prominent
songs,
members of the
as was
government,
demonstrated
being
above.
afraid, as they said,
Many
of the
tunes
army at
devoted to the hunter
Samos,
and his
and most
experiences
especially
in
of
forest and jungle.
Alcibiades, and
Others
also
picture
lest the envoys
insignificant
whom they
events
had sent
occurring
to
when going to the
Lacedaemon might do
bazaar.
the state some
Officials and the
harm about
various
the
public
authority of
servants
the
are spoken
people,
of in
without
melodious
insisting
formful
on
of praise
objections
or
to the
saturated
excessive
with contempt.
concentration of
Tax
power in a
collectors
few
fare
hands.
worse. They
The
are
effort
said to
that the
combine their
5,000
duties with
must be
rape and
shown to
lust.
exist not
Songs
merely
of
in
this
name but in
kind are full of
reality, and
mockery,
the
and are nothing else
Constitution
than a
placed
joyously
upon a fair
manufactured
basis.
tirade against those whose
But this was
duty it is
merely
to
their
fill the
political
coffers of
cry,
government.
most of them being driven by
The
private
shrewd mania
ambition
is
into the
not
line of
forgotten.
conduct
His
so surely
activities are
fatal
too
to
well known
oligarchies
among
that
the
arise out
Bills,
of
and it is more than
democracies,
natural that
for all
money
at once
lenders,
pretend to
etc.,
be not
figure
only equals
prominently
but
in
each the
songs,
chief and
just in
master of
order
his
to take
fellows,
innocent,
while
though
under
not
a
less
democracy
biting,
a
revenge.
disappointed
Songs
candidate
relating
accepts
to the
his defeat
relations of
more
the opposite
easily,
sex
because he has
supply,
not the
however, the
humiliation of
most
being beaten by
appreciated
his
source and
equals,
form of
but what
entertainment,
most clearly
especially on
encouraged the
occasion of
malcontents
communal
was the
dances
power
or
of
at moments when the
Alcibiades at
crowd,
Samos,
in
and their own
festive mood,
disbelief in the
indulgent to
stability of the
excessive intake of
oligarchy, and it
alcohol.
was now a
Many
race
songs are
between them as to
exceedingly
which
obscene
should
in their therefore
become
much
the
in
leader of
favor.
the commons.
They are intended to create the proper
Meanwhile, the
atmosphere for
leaders and
orgies to
members of the
follow.
400 most opposed to a
Such is life in the
democratic form
jungles,
of government.
unswervingly heading
Phrynichus,
to
who
the
had
point.
the
The
quarrel with
stories told among the
Alcibiades
bills
during
are
his
mostly
command
a
at
mixture of
Samos,
reality and fable.
Aristarchus, a bitter and
Often the
inveterate
action is
enemy of
made
the
difficult by
commons,
the introduction of
and
mystic
Pisander
beings
and
or
Antiphon and others of the
unanimated
chiefs who
objects.
already as soon as
Nevertheless,
they entered
able
upon
to speak
power,
and to
and
understand.
again when the
Some
army at
animals,
Samos
for
seceded
instance the
from them and
fox and the
declared
snake,
for a
exhibit all
democracy,
the
has
attributes and
sent
cunningness
envoys
and
from their
vice,
own body
though
to
they are
Lacedaemon
sometimes
and made
allowed to
every
make
effort for
themselves
peace,
useful by
and had
solving
built the
riddles
wall
and
in
thus bring the
Oceania.
stories or
Now
fables
redoubled
to a
their
successful
exertions when
end.
their envoys returned from
Field and
Samos,
forest,
and they
jungle
saw
or
not only the
riverside,
people but
in
their
short
own
the
most
scenery to
trusted
which the
associates
bills are
turning
accustomed,
against them.
were selected as
Alarmed
the
at the
most
state of
suitable
things at
background,
Athens as at
by means of
Samos,
which a
they
certain
now sent
simplicity
off
and
in haste
naivety is
Antiphon and
imparted.
Phrynichus
May the
and 10
following
others with
few examples
injunctions to
throw
make
some
peace
light on
with
the foregoing
Lacedaemon upon any
introduction. Once
terms,
upon
no
a time
matter
a
what,
man went to
that
the
should be
jungle.
at all
It was a lovely
tolerable.
morning in
Meanwhile
spring.
they pushed
The
on
wind
more
blew
actively
mildly
than
and
ever with
gentle
the
over the
wall in
country, and the
Oceania.
man strolled happily about,
Now the meaning of
delightfully
this
gazing
wall,
at flowers
according
and
to
trees around
Theomenes and
him.
his supporters,
Whilst
was not so
aimlessly
much to
journeying
keep out
through
the
the
army
thicket,
of
he
Samos,
happened to come
in
to a
case of
big
its
tree,
trying to
from
force
one of
its
the
way into
branches of which a
Piraeus,
giant snake
as
was
to be able
hanging.
to let
Although
in,
the serpent
at pleasure,
behaved quite
the fleet
well,
and
the
army of the
wanderer
enemy.
thought it wise to destroy the snake by setting fire to the tree. The tree caught fire within a short time, and the serpent felt rather embarrassed.
With the wall
In her
already
despair,
existing
she
on the
appealed to the man to be
land side, so that
merciful,
a few
and to
men
assist her
placed
in
in
her
it might
attempt to
be
leave
able
the
to
tree.
command the entrance.
The
The
man,
old wall on the
however,
land
being
side and the
timid
new
by
one now
nature,
being built within
exclaimed
on
that
the
he is
side of
afraid
the
that the
sea,
snake
both
might
their
bite
men
him
and
as
one
soon
of the
as
two
assistance
towers
is
standing
coming
at the
forth.
narrow mouth
The
of the
serpent
harbor.
hastened
They
therefore to
also walled
explain
off
that
the
she never
largest
intends to
portion
do such a
Piraeus, which
vile
was in
thing, and in
immediate
order to
connection
make
with
it
this
easier
wall,
for him to
and kept
decide
it in their
quickly,
own
she
hands,
instructed him in
compelling all
which
to
way of
unload there the
escape could
corn that
most
came
easily be
into the
staged.
harbor,
Take a
and what they
long
had
stick
in
and lean
stock,
it against
and
the
to take
branch
it
on
out
which
from
I am
thence when they
resting,
sold
and I
it.
shall be able to get down
These
without
measures had
difficulty.
long
The
provoked
man
the
did as
murmurs
told,
of
and the serpent
Theomenes,
alighted.
and when the envoys
As soon
returned
as
from
she was out of
Lacedaemon
danger,
without
she
having
turned
effected
against
any
her
general
Savior and made it quite
pacification,
clear that
he
she will
affirmed that
bite
this
him
wall
now.
was like
The
to prove
man
the ruin of the
protested
state.
vehemently and
At
only
this
saved
moment
himself by
42 ships from
suggesting that somebody
Peloponnese,
else must be
including
asked
some
in order to
Siciliot and
ascertain if the
Italian
snake's
vessels from
attitude is
Locrian
justified.
Tarentum,
So
had
they
been
went
invited
together
over
in
by the
search of
Euboeans
somebody
and
or
were
something
already
able to
riding
speak
off Los and
justice.
Laconia
The path they
preparing for
crossed
the
on their
voyage
way
to
was
Lia,
considered
under
to
the
be
command of
experienced in judging, and
Agesandridas,
the man
son of
addressed the path as
Agesander, a
follows: Dear
Spartan.
sister, I
Theomenes
have
now
saved the
affirmed that
life
this
of the
squadron
serpent,
was
and now,
destined not
as a
so
bad
much to
reward
aid
for my
Euboea as the
kindness,
party
I am
fortifying
threatened to be
Oceania,
bitten without
and that unless
remorse.
precautions were speedily
And the
taken,
path
the city
answered
would be
during all the years
surprised and
that I am
lost.
here in the jungle. I
This
certainly
was no
saw
mere
many strange
calumny,
things,
there
but
being
such a case
realism
as yours
such
never
plan
happened
entertained
before,
by the
and I am
accused.
afraid,
Their
I
first
feel at
wish was
loss
to
and
have
quite
the
unable to
oligarchy
tell you
without
what you
giving
should
up the
do. The
empire,
snake and the man
failing
had
this to
thus to
keep their
continue their
ships and
search,
walls
and,
and be
luckily,
independent,
they met a
while,
mare that was
if this
grazing
also were
peacefully under
denied
some
them,
tree.
sooner than
But,
be the first
alas,
victims
the
of the
mare was no
restored
wiser than the
democracy,
path,
they were
and could
resolved to call in
consequently
the
not
enemy to
reveal
make
any
peace,
information
give
that
up
might
their
settle the
walls and
dispute.
ships, and
Whilst
at
they
all
were just
costs
turning away
retain
after
possession
having
of the
thanked the mare
government,
for the
if their
benevolent
lives
interest
were
she had
only
taken in
assured
their
to
case,
them.
a
For
fox
this reason
strolled
they
towards the
pushed
group,
forward
and
the
he too listened
construction of their
politely to
work
the
with
story.
posterns and entrances
He
and means of
thoughtfully rubbed his
introducing the
paws
enemy,
against his
being
nose,
eager to have it
meditated
finished
for
in
a while,
time.
and then made the following utterance.
Meanwhile, the
It is
murmurs
most
against them
difficult
were
to
at
judge
first
in
confined
so
to a
intricate
few
a matter.
persons and
None
went
of
on in
us,
secret,
whose advice
until
is
Phrynichus,
requested, was
after his
present when the
return from
snake
the
was
embassy
saved,
to
and the
Lacedaemon,
explanations
was
given
laid
are not
wait for
clear
and
enough as
stabbed
to
in
the
full
order at
market
which
by one
things are
after
supposed to have
Peripoli,
happened.
falling
I
down dead
therefore
before he
suggest
had
that
gone
we should
far from the
altogether
council
walk back to the
chamber.
tree,
The
where we shall
assassin
assist the
escaped, but
serpent
his
to regain the
accomplice,
branch on
an
which she was
Argive,
sitting before
was
the
taken
fire
and put
started.
to
The
the
man will
torture by
again
the
lean his stick
400,
against the
without
branch,
their
and
being
every
able to
phase of the
extract from him
escape
the
will be
name of his
reenacted as
employer, or
before.
anything
Everyone
further than that he
agreed.
knew of
The
many
snake
men who
was flung
used to
on the branch
assemble
of the
at the
tree,
house of
and
the
as soon
commander
as
of
she
the
tried to
Peripoli and
occupy
at
her
other
former
houses.
position,
Here
all
the
the
matter
other
was
members
allowed
of
to
the party
drop.
ran away, leaving the
This
snake
so
alone in
emboldened
distress.
Theomenes and the aristocrats
It
and
is
the rest of
interesting to
their
note that the
partisans in the
fox seems,
400 and out
all
of
over the
doors,
world,
that
to
they now
enjoy the
resolved to
reputation of
act,
being
for
very
by this
shrewd.
time the
The
ships
fox
had
is,
sailed
as a
round
matter
from
of
Los,
fact, a
and
cautious
anchoring at
animal, and
Epidaurus
every
had
bill has
overrun
indeed
Aegina, and
opportunity enough to
Theomenes
study the
asserted that,
creature's
being
behavior
bound
when
for
hunting.
Euboea,
On
they
the
would
other
never have
hand,
sailed
many
into
a story
Aegina
can
and
never
come
be
back
brought
to
to a
anchor at
happy end
Epidaurus,
without the
unless they
introduction of
had been
some new and
invited to come to
unforeseen
aid in the
factor,
designs of
and the
which
fox
he had
apparently
always
happens to
accused the
be, at the
government.
desired
Further
moment,
inaction
always
had
ready
therefore
and
now
prepared
become
to save the
impossible.
situation. Another
In the
fable,
end,
for
after a
instance,
great many
related that a
seditious
man was
harangues and
once asked by a
suspicions,
tired
they set to
crocodile
work in
to carry it to
Rionis,
the
the
pond.
heavy infantry in
The
Piraeus
crocodile
building the wall
admitted
in
to feel rather
Oceania,
exhausted
among
as a
whom
result
was
of a long
Eurysticrates,
journey. It
a
had to
colonel,
undertake in
with his
family
own
matters.
tribe,
The man
laid
agreed
hands
to
upon
assist the
Alexicles,
crocodile,
a
carried
general
it to a
under the
nearby tank,
oligarchy and the devoted
dreaded,
adherent of
however,
the
soon
cabal,
to have
and
the
took him
vicious
into a
creature.
house and
The
confined him
crocodile,
there. In this
regardless
they
of
were
any
assisted by
expected
one
gratitude,
Herman,
caught the
commander of the
man's leg,
Peripoli
and
and
at the very
Munichia,
moment when it
and
intended to
others,
pull
and
the man
above
into the
all had
water,
with them the
a
great
fox
bulk of
happened
the
to come
heavy
to the tank in
infantry.
order to quench its
As
thirst.
soon as
The
the news
struggle
reached
between
the
man and
400,
crocodile
who
could
happened to
therefore
be
not
sitting in the
escape his
council
notice
chamber.
and, moreover,
Except the
the fox
disaffected
offered to
wished
take
at once
steps
to go
that
to
might
the post where
reconcile
the
and
arms
satisfy
were,
both
and menaced the
adversaries.
Ramani's and his party.
The crocodile, still holding the man's leg firmly,
and said that he
refused
was
to
ready
see the point,
immediately to go and help to
after being
rescue
told by the fox
Alexicles,
that it would
and taking
largely
with him one
benefit
of
by the
generals
procedure
belonging to his
recommended by
party,
him.
went
The
down to
crocodile agreed
Piraeus,
and obediently
followed
closed
by
its eyes,
Aristarchus and
as
some
requested
young
by
men
the
of the
fox.
cavalry.
As
All
soon
was
as the
now
eyes were
panic and
closed, the
confusion.
fox hurriedly bit into the
Those
tail
in
of
the
the
city
crocodile,
imagined that Piraeus
which,
was already
frightened and
taken and the
alarmed,
prisoner put
released
to
the
death,
leg of the man
while those
who,
in
as
Piraeus
can be
expected
expected,
every
ran
moment to
away
be
as quick
attacked
as
by
he
the party
could.
in the
Various
city.
wild
The
animals
older
play a
men,
prominent part
however,
in the fables
stopped
of
the
the
persons
Bills.
running
Some
up and down the
creatures,
town
for
and
instance
making
the
for the
wild and
stands of
ferocious
arms,
tiger,
and
is often
Thucydides the
represented as
Pharsalian,
wise and
Proxenus
aristocratic
of the
hero
city,
of the
came
jungle.
forward
On
and
other
threw himself
occasions
in the way
extreme
of the rival
silliness is attributed to
factions,
him.
and appealed to them not
The
to rule in the
contemptuous
state,
treatment,
while the
in the
enemy
latter
was still at
case,
hand
is
waiting
certainly
for his
based on feelings of
opportunity,
fear and
and so at
terror,
length
knowing
succeeded
only
in
too well
quieting
that
them
the
and in
tiger
keeping
is
their
not an
hands
animal
off
that
each
can
other.
so easily be
Meanwhile
slain. Its
Theramenes came down to
ferociousness is
Piraeus,
deliberately
being
disturbed into
himself one of the
ridicule, out
generals,
of sheer
enraged
spite
and
and
stormed
revenge.
against the
So it
heavy
is told that a
infantry,
timid
while
field mouse once
Aristarchus and
came
the
across a
adversaries of the
sleeping
people
tiger,
were
and
angry
being
in
sure
right
that her
earnest.
presence was not noticed by
Most of the
murderer of the
heavy
jungle,
infantry,
she started,
however,
not
went on
without
with
mischief, to eat the tiger's ears
and
who,
asked the
after being
Brahmanes if he
deprived of
thought
his
the wall
ears,
had been
was quite
constructed
unable
for
to
any
listen
good
to all the
purpose,
strange
and whether
sounds
it would
and
not be
warnings of the
better that it
jungle.
should be
He
pulled
crawled
down.
henceforth
To
through
this
the
he
forest
answered
in a
that if they
fashion
thought it best
entirely
to pull it
unbecoming
down,
to a
he
tiger,
for his
and
part
become soon
agreed
the
with
laughing
them.
stock
Upon
of all
this,
the
the heavy
animals living
infantry
near
and a
and
number
far.
of the
In
people in
practical
Paris
life,
immediately
such a
got up
thing
on
will
the
of course never
fortification and
happen,
began to
but the
demolish
quantity
it.
of it is enough to delight
Now
men
their
who
cry to the
know out of
multitude was that
experience
all should
that
join
it is
in the work
certainly
who
not
wished the
easy to play
5,000
tricks
to
with a
govern
tiger.
instead of the 400. For
Snakes,
instead
of
of saying
course,
in so
are not
many
liked
words
by
all who wished
anybody.
the
The
commons to
nasty
govern,
habit of
they still
attacking harmless
disguised
hunters did
themselves
never
under the
increase
name of
the
the
serpent's lack of
5,000, being
popularity
afraid
on its
that these
place.
might really
Allotted to
exist,
it in
and that
fables
they might be
is
speaking
decidedly
to
not
one of their
honorable.
number and get
The
into
mute
trouble
fish
through
did not
ignorance.
escape. A
Indeed, this
certain
was why
fable
the
narrates of
400
a
neither
big
wished the
fish, so
5,000
wise
to
and
exist,
intelligent,
nor
that
to
it was
have it
able to
known that they
teach
did
its
not
wisdom
exist,
to others.
being of opinion that to give
The fishermen
themselves
who
so
all
many
about the
partners in the
scholarly
empire
fish
would be
listened
downright
often to its
democracy,
lectures as they
while the
became
mystery
nearly
in
as wise
question
as the
would make the
fish.
people
One day
afraid
the
of one
fish was
another.
invited to attend a
The
marriage
next day
ceremony
the
in the nearby
400,
village.
although
This,
alarmed,
of
nevertheless
course, was a
assembled in
ruse
the
and a
council
trap so
chamber,
cleverly
while the
laid that
heavy
even the learned
infantry and
fish could not
Piraeus,
detect it.
after
The
having
fishermen
released
knew
their
well that all their
prisoner
attempts to
lexicals and
catch the
pulled
big
down the
fish were again and again
fortification, went with
frustrated
their
by the
arms to the
intelligence of the
theatre of
fish,
Dionysus,
though there could
close to
apparently be no
Munychia,
harm in
and there held
inviting
an
the fish to
assembly in
come to
which
the
they
village.
decided to march into the
The
city,
fish
and
accepted the
setting forth
invitation,
accordingly
and as soon as
halted
they
in the
had covered a
Elysium.
distance far
Here they
enough
were
from the
joined by
water,
some
they caught
delegates
the
from the
unsuspecting
400,
fish
who
which,
reasoned with
after
them
some
one by
struggle,
one, and
finally found
persuaded
its
those
way
whom
into the
they
frying
saw to be the
pan.
most
It is said
moderate
that
to
the
remain
wedding
quiet
festivity
themselves,
became known
and to
as
keep in the
particularly
rest,
gay and frolic.
saying that they
The
would make
bride,
known the
who ate the brain of
5,000,
the
and
fish,
have the
gave birth
400
to a
chosen from
son.
them in
The bills are
rotation,
very fond
as
of
should be
fish.
decided by the
Its
5,000,
flesh is
and
considered
meanwhile
to be a
entreated them
delicacy,
not
and
to
on
ruin
certain
the state or
occasions
drive it
fishing
into
parties
the
are
arms of
arranged,
the enemy.
attracting whole
After a
village
great many had
populations.
spoken and had
This
been
little
spoken
story is,
to,
in
the whole
itself,
body of heavy
absolutely
infantry became
insignificant
calmer
but
than
nevertheless
before,
popular.
absorbed by
The
their
bill likes
fears
to
for the
stress that
country
he is
at
by no
large,
means a
and now
drowsy,
agreed to hold upon an
unintelligent being.
appointed day
He
an
knows all the
assembly in
little
the
tricks
theatre
of
of
his
Dionysus
professional
for the
occupation, and it
restoration
is
of
natural
Concord.
that his skill, based on
When the day
long
came for the
experience, finds
assembly in the
somehow
theatre,
expression in
and they
his
were upon
fables
the
and
point of
folklore.
assembling, news
The
arrived
bulk
that
of
the
the
42
popular
ships
stories
under
are,
Agisandridas
however,
were
so
sailing from
obscene that,
Megara
and must
along the
remain
coast of
restricted amongst
Salamis.
the
The
bills.
people
As
to a man
mentioned
now thought
before,
that it was
sex
just what
plays an
Theramines and
important
his
part in the
party had
life of the
so often
bills.
said,
To be
that
loose
the
and
ships
fast
were
is the
sailing
rule
to
of
the
the day.
fortification,
Certain
and
restrictions and
concluded
moral
that they had
conventions
done well to
prevent the
demolish
average bill
it.
from
But though
going
it may
farther than he
possibly have
already
been by
does, though
appointment
in
that
imagination,
Agisandridas
at
hovered about
least, the
Epidaurus
most
and the
perverse
neighborhood,
cravings are
he would
expressed
also
in their
naturally be
stories,
kept there by the
and,
hope of an
although it is
opportunity
claimed that such
arising out of the
perversity is
troubles
merely
in the
possible
town.
within the framework of
In
already
any case, the
incredibly fantastic
Athenians, on
stories,
receipt
it
of the
can,
news,
without
immediately ran
hesitation,
down en
be
masse to
said that the bill is
Piraeus,
only too
seeing
willing to do
themselves
exactly what
threatened by
his
the enemy
story
with a worse
characters are
war than their
supposed to
war
do.
among themselves, not at a
Pathological
distance,
inclinations,
but close
like
to the
sexual
harbor of
contact with
Athens.
animals,
Some
figure
went on board the
prominently in
ships already
fables or
afloat, while
semi-fables,
others
and a closer
launched fresh
study of the
vessels,
intimate life
or
of the
ran to
bills will
defend the
possibly
walls in the
reveal the
mouth of the
alleged strange
harbor.
habits of
Meanwhile, the
story. Figures
Peloponnesian
are also
vessels sailed
common among the
by, and
population.
rounding
In
Sunium
matters
anchored
relating to
between
sex,
Thoricus and
nobody
Praegili,
discusses
and
more
afterwards
frankly than the
arrived
bill.
at
It forms
Orifice.
everywhere the main subject
The
of
Athenians,
conversation,
with
even in the
revolution in the
presence of
city,
half-grown
and unwilling to
children.
lose a
The
moment in going to
imaginative-minded
the relief of
youngsters,
their most
who are on the
important
threshold of
possession,
puberty,
Freubia was
becomes an
everything to
easy
them
prey
now
of
that they
those
were shut
members
out
of the
from
community who
Attica,
see
were
great fun in
compelled to
it.
put to sea in haste and with
Taboos,
untrained
based on
crews,
sex,
and sent
do not
thaumaturgs
exist.
with some vessels to
Everything,
Eretria.
as long as it
These
can be
upon their
carried out,
arrival,
will
with
be
the
carried
ships
out.
already in
It is,
Euboea, made
however,
up a total of
difficult to
36
decide
vessels,
to what an
and were
extent the bills
immediately
should be
forced to
blamed for it.
engage.
They do
For
not share the opinion
Agisandridas,
that they act
after his
wrongly.
crews had
Belief in
dined,
any
put
attempt to
out from
prohibit
Orifice,
perversity,
which
for
is about
instance,
7
the
miles
pillars of
from
their social
Eretria by
structure would be
sea, and the
destroyed. The
Athenians,
primitive man
seeing
will,
him
in such
sailing
a
up,
case, not
immediately
turn to a
began to man their
substitute,
vessels.
Lowerize, but will
The
indulge in
sailors,
greater forms of
however,
excess
instead
only
of being
harmful to
by
him
their
and his
ships, as
community.
they supposed, were gone
One
away
has always to bear in mind that the dictates of the jungle are bound to be different from those of settled and civilized districts, and it must be left to the inhabitants of the jungle to shape their life according to the conditions prevailing, which means that they can indulge freely and unrestricted in habits that are out of place elsewhere, or, let us say, are known elsewhere, but not openly. The bills is certainly, as a matter of fact, more praiseworthy and cleaner than the make-believe attitude of many civilized men. Corruption of thought and action is rampant in big cities, and society ought to be declared bankrupt unless one resorts to a brush-up and white wash of the worm-eaten facade.
Took refuge in Eritrea.
I'm Julie, the woman who runs Global Grey, the website where this ebook was published. These are my own formatted editions, and I hope you enjoyed reading this particular one. If you have this book because you bought it as part of a collection, thank you so much for your support. If you downloaded it for free, please consider, if you haven't already, making a small donation to help keep the site running. If you bought this from Amazon or anywhere else, you have been ripped off by someone taking free ebooks
made a
books from
general
my site and
settlement of the
selling them.
affairs of the
You should
island.
definitely get
When
a
the news of
refund
what had
colon.
happened in
Thanks for
Euboea
reading
reached
this, and I
Athens,
hope you
a
visit the
panic
site
ensued
again.
such as
New
they had
books are
never
added
before
regularly,
known.
so you will always find
Neither the
something of
disaster in
interest.
Sicily, great as it seemed at the time, nor any other had ever so much alarmed them. The camp at Samos was in revolt. They had no more ships or men to man them. They were at discord among themselves and might at any moment come to blows, and a disaster of this magnitude coming on the top of all, by which they lost their fleet, and worst of all Euboea, which was of more value to them than Attica, could not occur without throwing them into the deepest despondency. Meanwhile their greatest and most immediate trouble was the possibility that the enemy, emboldened by his victory, might make straight for them and sail against Piraeus, which they had no longer ships to defend, and every moment they expected him to arrive. This, with a little more courage, he might easily have done, in which case he would either have increased the dissensions of the city by his presence, or, if he had stayed to besiege it, have compelled the fleet from Ionia, although the enemy of the oligarchy, to come to the rescue of their country and of their relatives, and in the meantime would have become master of the Hellespont, Ionia, the islands, and of everything as far as Euboea, or, to speak roundly, of the whole Athenian empire. But here, as on so many other occasions, the Lacedaemonians proved the most convenient people in the world for the Athenians to be at war with. The wide difference between the two characters, the slowness and want of energy of the Lacedaemonians as contrasted with the dash and enterprise of their opponents, proved of the greatest service, especially to a maritime empire like Athens. Indeed, this was shown by the Syracusans, who were most like the Athenians in character, and also most successful in combating them. Nevertheless, upon receipt of the news, the Athenians manned 20 ships and called immediately a first assembly in the Nix, where they had been used to meet formerly, and deposed the 400 and voted to hand over the government to the 5,000, of which but all who furnished a suit of armor were to be members, decreeing also that no one should receive pay for the discharge of any office, or if he did should be held accursed. Many other assemblies were held afterwards, in which lawmakers were elected and all other measures taken to form a constitution. It was during the first period of this constitution that the Athenians appear to have enjoyed the best government that they ever did, at least in my time, for the fusion of the high and the low was effected with judgment, and this was what first enabled the state to raise up her head after her manifold disasters. They also voted for the recall of Alcibiades and of other exiles, and sent to him into the camp at Samos, and urged them to devote themselves vigorously to the war. Upon this revolution taking place, the party of Pisander and the Lexicals and the chiefs of the oligarchs immediately withdrew to Decelia, with a single exception of Aristarchus, one of the generals, who hastily took some of the most barbarian of the archers and marched to Ono. This was a fort of the Athenians upon the Boeotian border, at the moment besieged by the Corinthians, irritated by the loss of a party returning from Decelia, who had been cut off by the garrison. The Corinthians had volunteered for this service, and had called upon the Boeotians to assist them. After communicating with them, Aristarchus deceived the garrison in Ono by telling them that their countrymen in the city had compounded with the Lacedaemonians, and that one of the terms of the capitulation was that they must surrender the place to the Boeotians. The garrison believed him as he was general, and besides knew nothing of what had occurred owing to the siege, and so evacuated the fort under truce. In this way the Boeotians gained possession of Ono, and the oligarchy and the troubles at Athens ended. To return to the Peloponnesians in Miletus. No pay was forthcoming from any of the agents deputed by Tissaphernes for that purpose upon his departure for Aspendus. Neither the Phoenician fleet nor Tissaphernes showed any signs of appearing, and Philip, who had been sent with him, and another Spartan, Hippocrates, who was at Phaselis, wrote word to Mindorus, the admiral, that the ships were not coming at all, and that they were being grossly abused by Tissaphernes. Meanwhile Pharnabazus was inviting them to come, and making every effort to get the fleet in, like Tissaphernes, to cause the revolt of the cities in his government still subject to Athens, founding great hopes on his success, until at length, at about the period of the summer which we have now reached, Mindorus yielded to his importunities, and, with great order and at a moment's notice, in order to elude the enemy at Samos, weighed anchor with 73 ships from Miletus and set sail for the Hellespont. Thither 16 vessels had already preceded him in the same summer, and had overrun part of the Chersonese. Being caught in a storm, Mindorus was compelled to run into Icarus and, after being detained 5 or 6 days there by stress of weather, arrived at Chios. Meanwhile Thrasyllus had heard of his having put out from Miletus, and immediately set sail with 55 ships from Samos, in haste to arrive before him in the Hellespont. But learning that he was at Chios, and expecting that he would stay there, he posted scouts in Lesbos and on the continent opposite to prevent the fleet moving without his knowing it, and himself coasted along to Methymna, and gave orders to prepare meal and other necessaries, in order to attack them from Lesbos in the event of their remaining for any length of time at Chios. Meanwhile he resolved to sail against Eresus, a town in Lesbos which had revolted, and, if he could, to take it, for some of the principal Methymnian exiles had carried over about 50 heavy infantry, their sworn associates, from Cuma, and hiring others from the continent, so as to make up 300 in all, chose Anaxander, a Theban, to command them, on account of the community of blood existing between the Thebans and the Lesbians, and first attacked Methymna. Balked in this attempt by the advance of the Athenian guards from Mytilene, and repulsed a second time in a battle outside the city, they then crossed the mountain and effected the revolt of Eresus. Thrasyllus accordingly determined to go there with all his ships and to attack the place. Meanwhile Thrasybulus had preceded him thither with 5 ships from Samos. As soon as he heard that the exiles had crossed over, and coming too late to save Eresus, went on and anchored before the town. Here they were joined also by 2 vessels on their way home from the Hellespont, and by the ships of the Methymnians, making a grand total of 67 vessels, and the forces on board now made ready with engines and every other means available to do their utmost to storm Eresus. In the meantime Indorus and the Peloponnesian fleet at Chios, after taking provisions for 2 days and receiving 3 Chian pieces of money for each man from the Chians, on the 3rd day put out in haste from the island, in order to avoid falling in with the ships at Eresus. They did not make for the open sea, but keeping Lesbos on their left, sailed for the continent. After touching at the port of Carteria, in the Phakiad, and dining, they went on along the Cumaean coast and supped at Arginusi, on the continent over against Mytilene. From thence they continued their voyage along the coast, although it was late in the night, and arriving at Harmidus on the continent opposite Methymna, dined there, and swiftly passing Lectum, Larissa, Hamaxius, and the neighboring towns, arrived a little before midnight at Rhoetium. Here they were now in the Hellespont. Some of the ships also put in at Sigeum and at other places in the neighborhood. Meanwhile the warnings of the fire signals and the sudden increase in the number of fires on the enemy's shore informed the 18 Athenian ships at Sestus of the approach of the Peloponnesian fleet. That very night they set sail in haste just as they were, and, hugging the shore of the Chersonese, coasted along to Ilaius, in order to sail out into the open sea away from the fleet of the enemy. After passing unobserved the 16 ships at Abydos, which had nevertheless been warned by their approaching friends to be on the alert to prevent their sailing out, at dawn they sighted the fleet of Mindorus, which immediately gave chase. All had not time to get away. The greater number however escaped to Imbros and Lemnos, while 4 of the hindmost were overtaken off Ilaius. One of these was stranded opposite to the temple of Protesilaus and taken with its crew, 2 others without their crews. The 4th was abandoned on the shore of Imbros and burned by the enemy. After this the Peloponnesians were joined by the squadron from Abydos, which made up their fleet to a grand total of 86 vessels. They spent the day in unsuccessfully besieging Ilaius, and then sailed back to Abydos. Meanwhile the Athenians, deceived by their scouts, and never dreaming of the enemy's fleet getting by undetected, were tranquilly besieging Eresus. As soon as they heard the news they instantly abandoned Eresus, and made with all speed for the Hellespont, and after taking 2 of the Peloponnesian ships which had been carried out too far into the open sea in the ardor of the pursuit and now fell in their way, the next day dropped anchor at Ilaius, and, bringing back the ships that had taken refuge at Imbros, during 5 days prepared for the coming engagement. After this they engaged in the following way. The Athenians formed in column and sailed close along shore to Sestus, upon perceiving which the Peloponnesians put out from Abydos to meet them. Realizing that a battle was now imminent, both combatants extended their flank, the Athenians along the Chersonese from Idacus to Arrhaene with 76 ships, the Peloponnesians from Abydos to Dardanus with 86. The Peloponnesian right wing was occupied by the Syracusans, there are left by Mindorus in person with the best sailors in the navy, the Athenian left by Thrasyllus, their right by Thrasybulus, the other commanders being in different parts of the fleet. The Peloponnesians hastened to engage first, and outflanking with their left the Athenian right sought to cut them off, if possible, from sailing out of the straits, and to drive their center upon the shore, which was not far off. The Athenians, perceiving their intention, extended their own wing and outsailed them, while their left had by this time passed the point of Cynossema. This, however, obliged them to thin and weaken their center, especially as they had fewer ships than the enemy, and as the coast round Point Cynossema formed a sharp angle which prevented their seeing what was going on the other side of it. The Peloponnesians now attacked their center and drove ashore the ships of the Athenians, and disembarked to follow up their victory. No help could be given to the center either by the squadron of Thrasybulus on the right, on account of the number of ships attacking him, or by that of Thrasyllus on the left, from whom the point of Cynossema hid what was going on, and who was also hindered by his Syracusan and other opponents, whose numbers were fully equal to his own. At length, however, the Peloponnesians, in the confidence of victory, began to scatter in pursuit of the ships of the enemy, and allowed a considerable part of their fleet to get into disorder. On seeing this, the squadron of Thrasybulus discontinued their lateral movement and, facing about, attacked and routed the ships opposed to them, and next fell roughly upon the scattered vessels of the victorious Peloponnesian division, and put most of them to flight without a blow. The Syracusans also had by this time given way before the squadron of Thrasyllus, and now openly took to flight upon seeing the flight of their comrades. The rout was now complete. Most of the Peloponnesians fled for refuge first to the river Midias, and afterwards to Abydos. Only a few ships were taken by the Athenians, as owing to the narrowness of the Hellespont the enemy had not far to go to be in safety. Nevertheless, nothing could have been more opportune for them than this victory. Up to this time they had feared the Peloponnesian fleet, owing to a number of petty losses and to the disaster in Sicily, but they now ceased to mistrust themselves or any longer to think their enemies good for anything at sea. Meanwhile they took from the enemy 8 Chian vessels, 5 Corinthian, 2 Ambraciot, 2 Boeotian, 1 Leucadian, Lacedaemonian, Syracusan, and Pellenian, losing 15 of their own. After setting up a trophy upon Point Cynossema, securing the wrecks, and restoring to the enemy his dead under truce, they sent off a galley to Athens with the news of their victory. The arrival of this vessel with its unhoped for good news, after the recent disasters of Euboea, and in the revolution at Athens, gave fresh courage to the Athenians, and caused them to believe that if they put their shoulders to the wheel their cause might yet prevail. On the 4th day after the sea fight, the Athenians in Cestus, having hastily refitted their ships, sailed against Cyzicus, which had revolted. Off Harpagon and Priapus they sighted at anchor the 8 vessels from Byzantium, and, sailing up and routing the troops on shore, took the ships, and then went on and recovered the town of Cyzicus, which was unfortified, and levied money from the citizens,